Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Just have to make sure because I am in Uganda and we're not entirely known for having the best internet connectivity, but we do have awesome tourism and all that. It's an amazing and exciting opportunity to be on this summit. Hello to all of you from different parts of Africa. I hope so far you've enjoyed what you've had. I hope you've learned so much. I hope you've been able to network because we are in a revolution despite the pandemic. We've been able to have such a summit because we are young people and we cannot let something like COVID-19 stop us from engaging and trying to find out how we can best utilize the opportunity. And the greatest opportunity given to us is the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Now, I am honored to be the moderator for panel one, and we have such a distinguished and powerful lineup of speakers. And just to give you a brief background regarding panel one, our topic will be growing the digital infrastructure in Africa for effective implementation of the African Free Trade Area Agreement beyond COVID-19. We have to look beyond COVID-19. And just to give you a brief percept is that digital infrastructure and access to the internet remains out of reach for most people on the continent, especially young people, with only 39.3% having access to the internet, according to the Internet World Statistics. African governments need to invest strategically and systematically in developing digital infrastructure services. So how can we harness this? The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted millions of lives, schools, and life as we know it. Unfortunately, the digital poor infrastructure has hampered business growth, and this has affected young people. So our opening question and what our panelists for today will be able to speak about and educate us on is, it is not in doubt that the digital trade is the next frontier on the continent, given the sheer number of Africa's youth population. We have seen numerous examples across the continent recently. In what ways do our panelists think that Africa's governments can build on the growing tech ecosystem through investment in digital infrastructure to support digital trade and promote continued development of digital solutions to address the continent's challenges? I'll just repeat the question so that we're all on the same page, both the panelists and our distinct attendees. And the question is, in what ways do I think that Africa's governments can build on the growing tech ecosystem through investment in digital infrastructure to support digital trade and promote continued development of digital solutions to address the continent's challenges? So our first panelist will be Mr. Andrew Beard. I'm not sure if I pronounced that wrong. And he is none other than the CEO of Vanu Group. First, going to Mr. Andrew Beard. Then we shall go to Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Resource Management in UNECA. Then we shall go to our distinguished lady, Ms. Jessica Anuna, the founder of Klesha. And then we shall finally end with none other than Mr. Luke Kizito Muleka, who is with Science Media Limited. So just to make sure, Mr. Andrew, do we have you on call? Okay, all right. So as Mr. Andrew is getting ready, we can go on to our next distinguished panelist, and that's none other than Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Natural Resources Management in UNECA. Mr. Jean-Paul, do we have you on board?
I'm here, thank you, and good afternoon. I'm in Addis Ababa, so it's good afternoon, but good morning and hello to everyone. I hope, first of all, ECA is delighted to be part of this event. And I think in terms of the actions in terms of digital infrastructure that need to be taken, firstly, we must recognize the huge opportunity. I think we must approach this from a perspective of optimism, the opportunity that is there for digital transformations across the continent. Of course, we're faced with a scenario where the connectivity rates are insufficient, and we need to invest dramatically in infrastructure to allow that to happen. But what can give us particularly hope that this is possible? If we look at the mobile revolution that happened in the last decade in Africa, by 2019, more than 80% of the population in Africa had a mobile phone subscription. The economic contribution of the mobile economy linked to the use of mobile phones is forecast to reach 7.6% of the overall African GDP this year in 2020. That's $214 billion. And just to show you that how this is growing, this was only 6.7% of GDP in 2016, and this at that point was only $153 billion worth of the mobile economy. So, and in the last 10 years, the continent has actually also recorded the highest growth in internet access, even though this overall internet access remains low. And that increase was 23.1% over the last 10 years. And to show you as well how far we've come, in 2005, internet access was still only 2.1%, and it's risen to 28.2%. But that is still low compared, it's still the lowest in the world, unfortunately. The opportunities that's there is that if we can create that connectivity across our entire continent, the growth that will be unleashed will be phenomenal. The problem that we have at the moment as well is that investments, and what is perhaps preventing further investments, the internet infrastructure that's already been installed remains expensive to users, and of existing users of internet, only 34% still have access to broadband facilities. It will cost, according to the ITU, around $400 billion to connect Africa digitally. But when we look at the opportunities through the AFCFTA, we can see huge opportunities to increase e-commerce opportunities. We've seen this happen under lockdown, where a number of companies have actually been formed, and there's very much been an embrace of the entrepreneurial spirit, particularly by young people in Africa. And the investment that needs to happen will further be a Kickstarter for economic growth. And it is part as well of this green growth model. If we can use digital infrastructure more effectively, ultimately we can create a growth model which uses less carbon, which creates less emissions, which is more in tune as well with the expectations of consumers, both within Africa and beyond. So the focus of governments has to be the regulatory environment that looks at affordable investments, that de-risks that investment for the private sector, and that these investments can be seen in the long term, because the returns are going to be there, that's for sure. But you have to fast track the investments up front for them to happen. Thank you. Sorry, maybe I was a little bit long, but I think that highlights a few of the key areas that I think we need to focus on going forward.
Thank you so much, Jean-Paul. I love it. You kept time short, precise, straight to the point, and we shall be hearing from you shortly as the attendees ask questions. Just to announce a bit of a revision in the lineup. Next, we shall be having Ms. Jessica Nuna, founder of Clash. After, we'll be having Mr. Cedric Atangana, CEO and co-founder of Wikasha, and Mr. Lukizito Muleka, founder of Science Media Limited. Then Ms. Alan Ekeledo, Executive Director of AfriLabs, and then
Sonia? Okay, I think we may have missed Sonia just a little bit from a connectivity perspective. But I think what's important is she was just introducing the rest of our speakers. So it was Anna Ekeledo and Nuha Biled. Thank you very much. So I think while we're waiting for Sonia's internet connectivity to improve, could I ask Jessica if you could contribute on your piece? Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Are you guys able to see me okay?
Jessica?
Yeah, are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah.
You
Can you
can,
see
you
me?
can take it forward, yes. Can you just put on your video?
Yeah, my video is on.
Okay, fantastic.
Not sure why it's not showing, but anyway, good morning, everybody. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. So thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to joining the discussion today. So as we know, the AFCTA agreement promotes the movement of capital, people and goods cross-border across Africa. But, you know, governments at this stage need to understand that digital trade is crucial to give consumers access to distant markets and also for companies to facilitate cross-border trade online. We know that in Africa, we have the fastest growing mobile penetration. Therefore, opportunities for cross-border trade is growing insurmountably. Young companies like mine, Fasha, are leveraging technology to benefit from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And other companies in e-commerce, main gateways, can take advantage of this, especially the control of tariffs and the ease of movement across the continent. As we know, currently 53% of Africa's exports currently go to countries, particularly in Europe. So the AFCTA encourages trade between African countries, and this is something that government should want to facilitate. You know, as my colleague said earlier, governments need to reduce the cost of data, increase network connectivity, and also that thus will increase e-commerce spending. We saw during COVID, companies like Amazon and Shopify in the West report rapid growth, and their shares went up considerably as well. The infrastructure to move goods easily cross-border across countries and states. The African Development Bank said that Africa was set to grow between 4% and 5% this year, but the impact of COVID has obviously slowed this down, causing some countries to introduce protectionist policies. So for many African countries, most of their trade is still with global trading partners as opposed to intra-Africa trade. And we know that the low levels of intra-Africa trade are because tariff revenue is still an important source for government revenue. So yeah, that's my contribution to the discussion today. Look forward to hearing what my other colleagues have to say and look forward to the Q&A as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jessica. Sonia, do we have you back with us again?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Apologies for that. The internet connection is a bit shaky. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Miss Jessica. That was really brief and straight to the point. Attendees, do not forget, if you have any
Sonia, I think we've kind of lost you again. So what I'm going to do is maybe just introduce our next panelist, Mr. Cedric Atangana. Mr. Cedric Atangana is the CEO and co-founder of YALDA. So over to you, Mr. Atangana.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me? Just to make sure my mic works well.
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, excellent. So thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me here. I'm Cedric Atangana. I'm the CEO and co-founder of YALDA, which is a Pan-African payment platform. I'm Cameroonian. My contribution to the topic that we are addressing today is firstly to thank the African Union and all the people who are working on the AFCFTA initiative, because our continent is has 1.3 billion people today, and when we compare it to big markets like China is 1.4 billion people. But the real thing is China has one language, one currency. It's a kind of want everything. It's a unified market. And we've seen companies starting in China becoming unicorns without leaving China, which is a big advantage that they have there, to have a unified market where people can just expand their business and reach more people. But when you come back home to Africa, we have 54 countries. We have 42 central banks, 42 currencies, so 42 local banking regulations. And so it becomes very difficult to trade between African countries. And more than 80% of our population don't use traditional banking services. Today, most of them, the 80% use mostly cash and now mobile money. And our continent has more than 165 local mobile money solutions on the continent, running isolated one from another, with no Pan-African interoperability. So if I'm sitting in Douala today, and I have clients in Nigeria, we share the border with Nigeria, but I want to be able to get payments from a Nigerian customer, which is completely crazy, because we are, sharing the borders. We have, populations who speak the same language in both countries, and they share the same culture and everything. But once you cross the border, you're now unable to get paid. And when you start thinking, okay, I'm in Cameroon, I have clients in Kenya or Senegal or Morocco or South Africa, it becomes like a nightmare. So I want to congratulate the team working on the AFCFTA, because I think we are moving to unifying our African market to become like a market like China, where I know a lot of startups on the continent are building amazing solutions that can benefit all our populations everywhere. So, and we have, I would say, 3 big breaks here. Like, first one is like human movements. So it becomes it is still very difficult for me as a Cameroonian to travel to Cote d'Ivoire. So I still need to have a visa. I have to, if I want to go to Ethiopia, I still need a visa, which is completely crazy, because we face the same issues. And maybe I could have a solution that could benefit people in Ethiopia. So that's the first break that these guys are addressing, which is absolutely great. Now we have the movements of our goods. So we are talking about e-commerce. E-commerce is, I'll see e-commerce in two ways. We have the e-commerce of products, like physical products. So Jessica was talking about, e-commerce like clothing and all those things. If I'm in Douala and I want to buy a product from her, and she needs to deliver those products to me in Cameroon, it is still challenging like hell. And this is something that we need to address. Make sure that our governments create bridges so goods can flow easily. And finally, the biggest break that we have today is the financial flow breaks. So many still struggle to move. It's much more easy to move money from Cameroon to France than moving money from Cameroon to Ethiopia. So we need to address, and that's what we are focusing on at WeCashUp. We are building a Pan-African payment infrastructure that aggregates all the existing local payment solutions. So we work with central banks, we work with banks and also mobile operators to make sure that we can create a Pan-African interoperability loop so that money can flow much more easily across the continent. So we can boost e-commerce and make sure that African startups become unicorns sitting in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cedric. Not sure if Sonia is back on the call, but if not, what I will then ask is, let's go straight into Luke's thoughts on the question today. So Luke Muleka from Kenya.
Thank you very much. My name is Luke Kizito Muleka. I'm the founder and managing director of Science Media Kenya Limited, a company that propagates social, economic, political, and talent development of persons with disabilities. Currently, we have 2 products that works around innovation to improve the inclusion of persons with disability. The first one is Science TV, which is a TV station broadcasting in sign language with voice overrides. That means that the deaf people are able to participate in our broadcast on a daily basis. That is from information, entertainment, and everything. Our programming is all has that inclusion aspect. And we employ most of our presenters on the station are persons with disabilities. So we have persons with albinism, we have blind people, we have deaf people, we have physical disability, and all other disabilities. Then the second product that Science TV was launched in 2017. Then in 2020, in response to COVID, we realized that deaf people will not be able to access proper interpretation services because of, in case an interpreter will be going to an isolation room, they will be dressed in full PPEs. That means their mouth, lips, and the eyes will be dressed, and the hands will also be covered. So we came up with a product called, innovated a product called Assistol. Assistol is a sign language, is a mobile sign language operator's application, in which now an interpreter can be able to be accessed on the in the isolation room without necessarily being in the isolation room. And we've seen that this product is being accepted by very many people. And the good thing is an interpreter in Kenyan Sign Language will speak to the Kenyans, Cameroonian Sign Language will speak to the Cameroonian, and currently we have interpreters from 6 African countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and South Africa. So those are the countries that currently we have interpreters, in which now it becomes easy. I want to dive into the topic of today, and this is the African Continental Free Trade Area. And as my colleague Atangan has just said, that we find that the issue of segregating, cutting Africa into very small blocks, that first of all, it becomes very uneconomical to do business, and becomes very uneconomical for anybody even to move. It has actually inhibited the movement of resources in terms of human labor, connectivity of the networks. Now you find that countries that have actually utilized the opportunity that's come with the theory of large numbers, they are overtaking Africa, while as an African continent, we have one solid block that is actually has everything that is favorable. Now, the African governments, I would say that COVID has accelerated the integration of digital space into our lives, and in which we are encouraging the African governments actually to look into COVID actually as an accelerator, in which you find that now most of the things, most of shopping, trade has actually gone online, in which even if you look at this conference, probably will be seated somewhere in a certain country, all of us are flown in. But now because of the COVID situation, it has enabled this conference actually to be online, which is actually something that we should take as pride as that has been brought out of the COVID. But now the question that comes in also as the African governments are adopting the digital way is how accessible are our digital platforms. For example, a government now will move into offering all its services and information on the web. How is that web designed to access for persons with disabilities to access? That is an area that the African governments should look into. And that's why when Cedric is designing the payment model, should look at how are persons with disabilities, that is all range of disability, including the deaf, including the blind, are they going to access this particular platform? And that means that the concept of leave no one behind is actually something that should be taken by the governments very seriously and look at. For example, during COVID-19, in which I saw in Kenya, where the newspapers were now distributing in a PDF mode. But the blind people are not now able to read these newspapers. Why? Because the format in which they were being sent was not compatible or accessible to the blind person. When we are building now the webs into the future, the websites of our governments, our institutions, and even the corporates into the future, how accessible are these? During COVID in Kenya, I will report that something positive happened in which the government through the institution that deals with disability gave a circular to most governments to ensure for as simple as a service charter, because what used to happen is at every reception of the government, there would be a service charter in which a blind person walking in would actually try to read because it's in Braille, and another blind person coming, that means there will be transmission of COVID. But from that, what happened is that all those material were instructed to be digitized, in which now on one platform, we have a blind person enjoying information and a deaf person, because it's now voice and sign language on the same thing. And that can actually be put on the website of the government agencies, in which now it becomes very accessible. So I would say that I'll just stop there and wait and listen to my colleagues' contribution. Then from there, I'll be happy to take some of these Q&A as we go further into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Luke, for that eloquent presentation. I love the fact that you mentioned a very important group, and that is people with disabilities. How can they also be engaged into the conversation? Because this trade agreement is not just for us, it's also for those who do not have connectivity. Please stay online, and I will be giving you your questions from the audience after the final speaker. Thank you so much for keeping time as well. Apologies for my connectivity. This is part of the conversation we're having. I'm in Uganda. They tax us for internet, but they cannot even give us good enough internet to hold conversations such as this, but we fight on. All right, so our next speaker for the day is none other than the very eloquent Miss Anna Ekeledo, who is the Executive Director of AfriLabs. Madam Anna, are you on the call? Kindly let us see.
Yes, I am.
All right, and we can hear you loud and clear. The floor is yours.
Fantastic.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. Well, to answer the question on what government should be doing to build digital infrastructure, I mean, I like the fact that the previous speakers have really elaborated on a very high level, from a very high level perspective on what the government should be doing and what the challenges are. To Cedric's contributions, which were excellent, really talking about the realities that tech startups face. So before I, answer the question, I'll just give a brief background of what I do. I run AfriLabs. AfriLabs is a network organization of technology and innovation hubs across Africa. We have 225 members across 47 African countries, all working to build and support tech startups to build their innovative ideas, build successful businesses that would, create jobs, scale, create wealth on a continent, and innovative solutions across all sectors. Now, this question on what the government should be doing, I would like to reference a very practical recommendation document that was put together by the ecosystem in Nigeria using a very bottom-up approach. And this is the Nigerian technology, the Nigeria ICT Innovation and Entrepreneurship Vision. And how this was developed over the last 2 years is, tech and tech startups came together with innovation hubs and other stakeholders such as corporate organizations, investors, and all of that to talk about the challenges that we face in building tech startups in Nigeria and in the continent generally. And what came out of these, series of discussions and dialogues and policy hackathons and all of that, engaging the government, is this document that had various pillars, and one of it specifically tackled digital infrastructure. Now, I like the fact that John Paul and Jessica earlier on spoke about the challenge of the high cost of internet connectivity. And Luke also mentioned the importance of being inclusive in designing these policies and implementing interventions. Now, a couple of recommendations that came out, to tackle this issue in Nigeria, for example, which is applicable in a lot of African countries, is looking at issues such as the right-of-way charges for fiber distribution across the nation. So in Nigeria, for example, if a telecommunications company wants to lay down fiber cables across a state, they'll literally have to pay each local government within the various district fees, you know, and then of course there are other taxes that would be implemented by state government, and of course there's taxes by the federal government. So there are all these charges and multiple taxation that eventually increases the cost of laying down infrastructure, digital infrastructure, in this case internet infrastructure, which then gets transferred to the consumers. Now, when we look at that in a very practical sense, you see consumers having to pay, you see business owners building their businesses and needing to leverage on the internet to scale, having to increase their startup costs as a result of internet facilities that are expensive. You see the consumers that can't consume these tech products, for example, because the cost of internet relative to their the average standard of living is way too high. And then this is why, you know, recommendations that have to do with tackling the problem from the roots, you know, and government creating policies to ensure that all these charges are basically removed or significantly reduced. Another as well is the dig once policy. So under dig once policy, we're looking at a scenario whereby any traditional infrastructure investment, so we're talking about roads, electricity, water, and the likes, should be accompanied by fiber optic cables where one doesn't exist already. So if a government sits and to develop a master plan for a city, either to improve on existing cities or to build new cities, what African governments should be doing right now is seeing broadband connectivity as an essential service. Just like water and electricity is, internet connectivity should be. And this also looks at last mile digital infrastructure. I like the fact that Rwanda as well, as part of its Rwanda master plan, also really took into consideration last mile broadband access and connectivity. So looking at broadband as a utility in itself. So other ways as well is supporting renewable energy, you know, through easily accessible tax incentives for renewable energy. Jean-Paul earlier also mentioned, you know, the need to reduce carbon emissions and the likes in consuming technology and building this digital technology. That's important. And lastly, it's quite important for the government as well to build a national data framework and harmonize e-governance to enable innovation, improve efficiency, transparency, accountability, and citizen participation in government. We should have serious conversations on the African continent about, you know, freedom of information, about being able to access social services via digital means as well. But of course, all this can only be facilitated and inclusive, irrespective of your location or physical economic disadvantage as a result of having access to affordable internet connectivity and other forms of digital infrastructure. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Ekeledo. Sonia, can you hear us? I must encourage at least one of our participants here to really think of internet connectivity as something that they should invest their time in. I think it will definitely be a very productive pursuit. Thanks, Anna. I mean, and just reflecting on what you're saying, you know, we have to think about what it means for us to be able to truly drive connectivity on this continent, and just reflecting on your point around the fact that you have to pay so much and you're within one country. Imagine now trying to connect the entire continent. So thank you definitely for that. What I will do now is, if I can just ask our final panelist, but certainly not least, Ms. Nuha Belait, to please join us in trying to answer this question. Thank you so much. And over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I have the pleasure to be with you today to answer this question and some other questions later. So to answer the first question, and let's talk about the African reality, namely in Maghreb. Whether you want it or not, we do not have an excellent infrastructure that allows the development of digital practices in many countries in Africa, and especially in the Maghreb countries. On the other hand, we have talented people experts in digital for that, which promotes us to think about reducing the flow of these people who find a job opportunity and go abroad. So in this case, governments are called to reduce the immigration of talented people. Then I totally agree with Mr. Anna Ekeledu. So she said that the government have also to reduce the cost of internet and materials. Not all African people have access to the digital world. So in this case, how we can think to develop e-commerce if citizens are not able to pay for internet, or they are not able to buy a smartphone or laptop to get access to internet, and then to practice to do e-commerce. During the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen all over the world the emergence of some e-commerce initiatives launched by people active in civil society, even in Tunisia. It was the case. So governments are called upon to cooperate with civil society and encourage all good initiatives. And we have seen this kind of cooperation during the crisis of the first wave of the COVID-19 crisis in Tunisia and in some other countries, even in Africa. Finally, cooperation between countries is very important in establishing a cooperative partnership. What I mean by this, some cooperation or some cooperative partnership exists, but are not materialized. That's meaning so we should be reviewed. They should be reviewed after taking into account the changing context. The way of practicing the e-commerce 10 years ago is not the same today, because we start talking about e-commerce since a long time, but today we are talking about a new context with the new digital practices. So today we have a new way of implementation and strategies. That's why some governments should review some law which organize the digital practices, which is the case, for example, in Tunisia. As I'm from Tunisia, that's why I talked many times about Tunisia. You know, in Tunisia, up to date, we have not access to Visa or MasterCard to pay for online activities outside the country, and the government wants to manipulate the flow of money exchange. So we are not able, up to date, this time, we are not able to make any transaction without asking the central bank for permission. That's why we have, that's why we have to review some laws, some partnership to be able really to encourage people to do e-commerce. And what's very, very important is to encourage civil society to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bilaid. And just to complete my introductions, my apologies there. Noa Bilaid is the PhD expert in digital practices, and she's the co-founder of the Arab Journalism Observatory. So thank you for that comment. And I think, you know, reflecting on what you're saying around the role of civil society in terms of being able to drive some of the changes that we need in this space, you know, and just challenging our governments on what those limitations look like. I see Sonia's back online. So Sonia, not at all.
All right, thank you so much. All right. At this point, I don't keep up. Now we've had from the very eloquent speakers, despite the technical glitches here and there. Once again, I'm sorry, it's the country that I am in. But now we go on to the most dynamic part of the session, and that is the question and answers. And we're going to start with none other than Mr. Jean-Paul. If I'm to remind the attendees who've just joined us, he is the Director for Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resources at UNECA. And Mr. Jean-Paul, let me just confirm, are you still with us? Kindly switch on your video.
I'm here. My video should be on, so hopefully you can see me.
Yes, I can see quite clearly. Now, please tell us, Mr. Jean-Paul, according to your opinion, given the challenges and realities faced by African countries, especially with regards to building digital infrastructure, much of which was exposed during the peak of the pandemic, and as a result of this congestion, would you say that the Africa Free Continental Area provides an appropriate platform for negotiating and implementing strategies for incremental investment in Africa's digital infrastructure? What is your opinion? Hit us with it.
Absolutely. I think that the AFCFTA is perhaps one of the biggest enablers to allow the investment that's needed in digital infrastructure, because obviously when you are the majority of African countries, almost half of African countries have populations of less than 10 million. Now, when you are, and plus you also have generally, compared to other regions, perhaps a less purchasing power. So now let's look at the analogy of the investments that happened, the mobile revolution. When telecommunications companies invested in mobile infrastructure, at the start, you had the same problem. You didn't necessarily have a large mass of people that could purchase these services, and at the start they were very expensive. But there was the facility. There are still some bottlenecks. We should not say that that is completely solved. But the majority of African governments have created an enabling environment where investment has come in from the private sector into mobile telecommunications, and this has dramatically dropped the price. And there are African companies that are involved. You know, it's not just foreign companies that have come to invest in Africa. There are homegrown African companies that have been successful in the mobile space, and we need that to happen as well now in the rollout of broadband and achieving that last mile. And there has to be a counter-cyclical investment, because now we are in a depression. We will probably be seeing a recession. There is a huge impact on businesses around the continent, and perhaps counterintuitively, now is the time to invest. Now is the time to try and make sure that these companies are putting in that infrastructure, because it will help us grow back. Governments have a role to play in some cases in terms of the facilitation of that environment. Generally in the UN, we don't advocate tax concessions because it's difficult to claw them back. But it is important that the environment is enabling, that there is clarity, there is certainty. And this is where the AFCFTA really comes in. Because if an investor is going to put their money in, they need to know that that market is there and that market is going to grow. And that's really, I think, what the difference that the AFCFTA can make. But governments have to make sure that the regulatory side goes along. There are efforts at the continental level to deal with this regulatory aspect linked with the AFCFTA. And once this is in place, which we are confident as part of that same process, this will be possible. You will have companies that will say, well, I can invest in Nigeria, but I can cover the whole of Western Africa, or I can invest in Tunisia or Algeria and also cover North Africa, and have that connectivity in our continent really take place. And we understand, and when we look at internet prices today, in the majority of African countries, they are above the sort of 2% of income, which makes it's competing with other needs. It's competing with food, it's competing with shelter, it's competing with daily needs. And we need the internet to be a facilitator, something that contributes to the wealth creation and not in itself extracting wealth from African citizens. And I think we're close to that, but we do need that investment to take place. And of course, one of the other challenges which goes hand in hand is the investment in electricity infrastructure, because we have a lot of gaps. There are almost 600 million Africans that still don't have access to electricity. And I think, I can't remember which of the panelists mentioned the example of Rwanda, that is matching their rollout of electricity and infrastructure with the rollout of digital fiber optic cable, for example, and infrastructure that can then allow the investment to happen and more citizens to have access to digital connectivity. Thanks, and back to you.
Thanks, Jean-Paul. And such an important question, in terms of creating that enabling environment. And maybe just to reflect on that point, I'm going to ask if Jessica and Nuna, if you can just Maybe just answer the question around the high cost of internet access and low bandwidth on the continent often acts as a barrier, and to many young entrepreneurs starting out, especially those looking to operate in technology or e-commerce. For businesses such as Clasher, what role do you believe the African Continental Free Trade Area can play in addressing this issue, and how should national entities leverage this agreement to speed up internet and make internet more accessible?
Yeah, thank you for that. So as we know, across the continent, we have massive bandwidth issues. Here in Nigeria, I could buy 50 GB, probably 10 GB the following day. And, I probably have, gone on LinkedIn, answered some emails and, spoken to my team as well. So given that, as young people trying to start businesses on the continent, it creates a barrier to entry for us. Not only is there a lack of ease of doing business in Africa as a whole, but the cost to start up, given the cost of data on the ground and given the lack of internet infrastructure, creates a massive barrier for young people wanting to start businesses. As we know, in Africa, we adopt technology faster than any other continent in the world, but governments, policies and processes that are put into place to actually create barriers for us to access the global economy through technology. And I think that's something that governments need to address if they want to encourage entrepreneurship amongst young people. As we know, 50% of the continent are under 30 years old. So it's going to be our young leaders now who are creating the next Amazons and Shopifys and Alibabas of Africa. However, if the government doesn't facilitate this, if they don't put in infrastructure in place to reduce the cost of data, slow down the speed especially, then we'll see our young people going to other continents and other places who give them the access they need to create companies and grow quickly cross-border across different continents as well. Nigeria right now is trying. They recently reduced the cost of data per gigabyte, which is a start, but that doesn't spread to the rest of Africa. South Africa, Kenya, Egypt being the biggest economies in Africa alongside Nigeria need to also increase and adopt these different policies to ease the technology barriers that we're having today as young startup founders.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jessica, for that very elaborate answer. And now we will go to the question for Mr. Luke Kizitomuleka for the new attendees. He is the founder of Science Media Limited. Mr. Luke, are you still with us? Kindly switch on your video.
Yes, I am. I'm still with you.
Oh. All right, fantastic. My brother from Kenya. All right, so tell us, Mr. Luke, in your own opinion and expertise, although Africa is making incremental investment in building its digital infrastructure, most of these investments go to foreign-owned firms who provide consulting and engineering works. How, in your opinion, can Africa develop its human capacity to address the skills in building and maintaining its digital infrastructure? Please take over.
Thank you very much, Sonia. And it's actually what I'm following and what my colleagues are saying is very informative. What I want to understand, probably just to throw a spanner in the works and ask the following question, that during COVID, where we had, because when we were going through school, I know we were told that the basic needs are food, clothing, and housing. But we've realized that even to acquire the basic need as food and clothing now, you must have some connectivity or internet, because that was the driver and it was accelerated. So the question is, and as we are going forward, as governments in Africa, as the population or the youngsters in Africa, the youth, the people involved in the fourth revolution, which is actually the internet revolution, are we going to look at internet or digital space as just another item or a basic need? Because right now, assuming the way things are, because in Kenya we experienced in the second wave and we are going to have issues of, probably lockdown coming in and all that stuff, in which for you to get food, you had actually to use an Uber, or you have to order using Jumia, which was supposed to get food from a restaurant, because you're not supposed to move out. So is internet still considered a luxury in the African context? Our government still considering internet as a luxury? What I believe in internet should be, or digital inclusion and accessibility should be recategorized and recalibrated to be a basic need. And actually, we should now be starting to talk about probably 5 basic needs now from what COVID has actually shown us. Now, back to your question. The people whereby the governments are rolling out and whoever is taking this space is actually the big boys from outside. Do we even believe that ourselves can actually do this? Does my friend Cedric, when he's going to present to the Central Bank of Cameroon, do they even trust him? They think that we don't believe in what we are doing as Africans. That is the problem that we are having. We believe that anything that comes from outside is more credible than what we do. But to realize that what happens is when technology is coming from outside, it's being imposed. So as African youth and African government, the policymakers in Africa, we should start believing in our youth. And this is what I've done, that I've told, what I normally tell the youth wherever I'm speaking is that we're going to do something until the African governments look for us. Because what has been happening is when we go to present to them whatever that we have, they start doubting even our capability. But let us, as the youth, the young people who are involved on this particular platform, do something until the government. That is what we are doing. That you do something in the space of disability. No one was ready to invest in it, even the simple thing as inclusion in terms of information. I went in there, and what the youth are doing in Africa, they are thinking that for you to do any business or for you to invest, you need a lot of money. Cedric will tell you, what you need, the most important thing is yourself, commitment. Then you need time, dedicate that time, be passionate, sleep and think about what you're doing. Roll out, they will come for you. But as long as we are not rolling out for them to come for us, they'll always believe that whatever we are producing is substandard. And as we continue being substandard, the flight of resources from our governments, from our budgets going outside is not helping the continent. Because if Cedric is able to get this money from Kenya, probably whatever is rolling out is coming from Kenya as a consultant, that money remains in Africa. If Noah Belide is doing something and actually being invested too by the government of Rwanda or the government of Cameroon, that money remains in Africa and it actually employs exponentially so many people. But we've left these resources in terms of our investment. The budgets, for example, how much money, if we do probably from analysis of our budgets, the total cumulative African budgets, how much of that money is flighted outside the continent for purposes of people thinking that we cannot offer solutions? Then when they came, people are coming in to do those same projects. We actually be the one who will be doing that job, but only being paid a meager. Had that money remained here, had African government trusted in the youth of this continent, then we'll be having a very, very credible, solid continent that is employing its own people. Otherwise, it will just be every day running on a treadmill and expecting African to grow. We are sweating a lot, but we're actually investing in outside, running on a treadmill in Africa and having a lot of conferences, a lot of talks, and it's not practical, it's not sustainable. So as I probably conclude, I just ask the African government the following question. What problems are they solving? What solutions do they have? What innovations? You'll find that all of them, and even if you look at the blueprints that they probably almost the same. What will happen after some, and what I normally say that the differentiator is the business model. What business model is the African government trying to implement? If the business model is that you'll get consultants from outside, you'll never make a move. If the business model is like China, what business model has China as a government? It has a business model. Let us invest in the Chinese companies and we'll make a move. So African governments should start investing in Africans, not as a favor, but as a business model. Let it be in the strategic plans of the government that we need to invest in the African youth, African solutions as a business model, not as a favor. Thank you very much.
All right, I was about to ask you to summarize. Since you're getting a lot of wonderful reviews from your presentations, I can see on the chat, people on the chat were with you, do not worry. Someone is saying this guy is so legit, Mr. Look for president. So thank you so much for that submission, even if you did take up a lot of time, but it was worth it. And one thing I get from intervention is that we need to do something so that African governments can make internet a basic need, and it's up to you to take it upon ourselves. Thank you so much, Mr. Luke. Without further ado, now we go to Madame Anna Ekelezo, the Executive Director of AfriLabs. Madame Anna, are you with us on the call? Kindly switch on your video. Oh, perfect. All right. So you've heard from the panelists and what their contribution they had to give to us. Now, personally, from your experience as Executive Director AfriLabs, in what ways do you think that the development of trade facilitation hubs, where young people with intra-African business initiatives and ideas are incubated, will fast-track the objectives of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area post-COVID-19? Please take up the flow.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Really good question. Well, I'll start by highlighting the importance of hubs first in supporting young people with businesses in Africa, right? So in the broader context. So first off, most hubs on the continent provide creative and collaborative spaces for young innovators to build their ideas, build their businesses and scale, right? They also provide these collaborative spaces where the young innovators and startups can meet with other innovators, work with people with diverse skill sets, expertise, and other ecosystem players, like access to investors, access to corporate organizations that can, increase market access as well. Hubs also provide venture building, business development, and tech support to startup, mentorship, and as I mentioned, access to funding and markets. Now, how can these hubs act as trade facilitation hubs? Through community collaboration and via a robust network support system across Africa, right? Which links to other ecosystem players such as national governments, regional and Pan-African trade agencies, corporate organizations, academia, investors, development finance institutions, and of course, other hubs across the African continent. Now, for this network support system to be successful, right, it has to be backed by a very strong intra-African support model driven by technology, right? So basically, with the implementation of the CFTA post-COVID-19, what we'll see is more startups being incubated by hubs in one location, which has been happening over the past couple of years, actually over the past decade, but now we'll see more of it. A startup being incubated within a hub in one African location, being linked to hubs in other locations with a strong market expansion startup curriculum. With targeted mentorship, with access to funding opportunities specifically targeted as funding earmarked for businesses looking to scale intra-African. And then we'll also see hubs play a role of negotiating more foreign direct investment into viable, scalable African-funded businesses. As well, considering the phase 3 of the African Continental Free Trade Area, is focused on e-commerce, basically the protocol on e-commerce. We're going to see more e-commerce businesses looking to take advantage of the trade incentives which result from the implementation of this phase 3 of the CFTA. Now, yes, sorry?
I think I kindly wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to round up and to do a call to anyone who really wants to work on working with innovation hubs and to support startup scale across the continent, AfriLabs is currently developing a first of its kind Pan-African hub management curriculum, which would have models specifically to address these strategic models for startup intra-African trade. And we're also building AfriPass, which will connect startups and hubs to virtual incubation services, which is another thing, of course, that we'll see more of post-COVID-19 with a reduction in the need or use of physical spaces, and also considering all the infrastructural challenges which we've discussed on this call. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You said something which I found very powerful, and that is, you said for this to work, we have to find a model that is backed up and driven by technology, and that is really, really powerful. Thank you so much for that intervention. Now moving on to our next speaker, Mr. Cedric Atangana, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And he's the CEO and co-founder of YALDA. I just love that name. Mr. Cedric, are you with us? Kindly switch on your video.
Yes, of course, I'm with her. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right. So your question for the day is that one of the challenges in increasing the reach of Africa's digital infrastructure has been the issue of rights away, with many cities imposing heavy charges on internet service providers, especially in connecting inland cities, landlocked countries with subsea internet cables. How can this be addressed, Mr. Cedric? Please give us your opinion in as brief as possible, because we're running out of time.
Okay, I don't believe in a centralized way to interconnect our cities. I believe that we should think of our cities as independent ecosystems. So we need to develop like solutions that could work in one city without the need to get connected to the others, because the continent is so big. The challenge is so we cannot just think the way Europe is connected, or China or America, and do the same in Africa. Things are completely different. I mean, in payments, there is one key thing that we generally kind of forget on our continent. We are working with mobile money agents. For example, these agents are the backbone of the mobile money revolution on the continent. So all the mobile operators, M-Pesa in Kenya, Orange Money, Airtel Money, all of them work with mobile money agents. And generally, these agents are small entrepreneurs from the informal sector. And when you see them across the street, when you are a mobile money agent, it looks like your life is completely broken, and you're completely forgotten from the business ecosystem. And we work with them. And I want to tell you a small story. I met a woman in Yaoundé. She was just selling small goods across the street. When I met her, she lost her husband, and she told me, I have kids, I don't know how to do, please help me. I gave her like $1,000, and she became a mobile money agent. And in 3 years, she grew her business so big that today she's driving a Mercedes. And these are the people who are building the backbone of our infrastructure. So we don't have to think, our revolution the way things are built in Europe. We should build our own revolution on the continent. Just like these mobile money agents, the app that we build, a mobile money app that helps them, generate more transactions, work more with more security, etc. And these are some of the things that we don't see in Europe. So in Europe, the people don't know about mobile money agents. And these are the people who are building the revolution on our continent. And we should focus on them. So same with the internet. For example, we built our app. Our app works with no internet connection for mobile money agents. You go on the Play Store, you download YALDA, and it works with no internet connection, because we know that when you start getting out of big cities like Lagos, you go start going to, like in remote areas, there is no internet connection there. So these people will be left behind. So we should also think innovation with the core realities of our markets. So before building, I don't know, Zoom or whatever solution could work on the internet, etc., our innovators on the continent, guys, let's focus on building solutions that match our local reality. So with internet, without internet, we will build that revolution. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Awesome contribution, Mr. Cedric. And I can see some of the attendees are saying, Mr. Cedric is right, the solutions must be tailor-made. And someone else is saying, build our own revolution on the continent. We need to have a different environment. So clearly the attendees agree with your powerful deliberation, and keep it up. YALDA app. Attendees you've had, we need to do things our own way for Africa to rise and for us to maximize the most opportunities out of this free trade area agreement. Now, last but not least, our last panelist for the day who will be answering our last question is none other than Madame Nuha Bilaid. I love that name. And for the new attendees, she's the co-founder of Arab Journalism Observatory. Madame Nuha, do we still have you on the call? Kindly switch on your video.
I'm with you. Yeah, I'm still with you.
Fantastic. I can see you loud.
And I have pleasure to talk to you as you had a problem connection.
But here we keep on striving until we get what we want. So your question, Madame, sometimes domestic regulations tend to slow down the pace of innovation. For instance, in some African countries, a license is required to fly a drone within a country's airspace, which is arguably for security reasons. Please tell us from your experience, how do you think African countries can align their digital policy and regulations with international best practices without compromising their national security to achieve the objectives of the Africa Free Continental Trade Area Agreement? In the briefest amount of time possible, please share with us what are your thoughts on this question.
Okay, it's a very important question and the most difficult one, I think, as we talk about an element, crucial element within the sovereignty of a country. To be brief, you know that the sovereignty of a country is an important element. So nobody, no country, no authority in the world should touch the sovereignty of the state. It's so crucial. But on the other hand, cooperations between countries is very important too. You know this. So maybe we must set up a mutual cooperation agreement to prevent the country from intervening in the sovereignty of another country. We can use drone, we encourage to use drone, we encourage to use technology because technology today is very important in our daily life, but also we have to respect other countries and respect if there is any partnership between countries. That's why I personally encourage any mutual cooperation agreement between countries in Africa or all over the world. And I think briefly that if the issue of airwaves in the past or aircraft, for example, without pilot was resolved at some point, so the issue of the drone could be resolved too in the same way, in the same government, in the same way. So governments will need only to establish cooperative partnership to make this cooperative more than to present a problem for another country. And in the same way, if we talked about African Union today, if you want to talk about Africa, so if we talk about African Union, so this is the role of the UA to contribute to make cooperations between countries to be able to be able to use drone in another country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And most importantly, for keeping it brief, like you said, your question was the most complicated, but you managed to pull it off without a doubt. And I can see the attendees agree with you. One of them is saying, up to now, we learned the art of willingness and we need the heart of change for all of this to work. I can see my time is up. Thank you so much, my dearest panelists. Despite the interruptions in connectivity, we managed to pull off a successful discussion. And the point I could get that cut across all of you is that the time is now. We need to make internet connectivity, digital inclusivity. We need to include people with disabilities. We need to look at how we can engage our renewable resources so that Africa's youth have more access to how we can use this Africa Free Continental Free Trade Area Agreement more effectively. It has been a very awesome session. Thank you so much, our panelists, Mr. Jean-Paul, thank you so much. Miss Jessica from Clasha, thank you so much. Mr. Luke Kizito from Science Media Limited, thank you so much. Madam Anna, we appreciate you. Mr. Cedric, wonderful deliberation. And last of all, Madam Nuha, thank you so much for that awesome contribution. So without further ado, I think as moderator of panel 1, I'd like to call panel 1 to a close and to let you know there are other awesome panels that are going to go throughout the day. Please stay tuned, and I would like to give back the floor to my awesome colleague and brother, Grant. There you go, Grant, take over the floor.
Thank you so much, my sister Sonia. I can see that you meant it when you said we strive, and I can see that with your strive, you have managed to conquer the internet connectivity problem. So thank you so much for that very, very informative session, and thank you to all the panelists. I think we certainly have gotten some rich food to think about. And to ponder about, and so we really appreciate the thoughts made there. Now, colleagues and participants, we are running slightly behind schedule. So our next session really is almost like just a bit of a break in the schedule, some fun, and I'm going to ask my colleagues if they can just come and take over the session. But what I will say is, unfortunately, I will cut short the session from 30 minutes to about 20 minutes. So we just need to catch up with our schedule there. So thank you very much. And over to the team, we've just taken a short break. Stay tuned, enjoy the entertainment and participate. Thank you so much. See you shortly.
Hello. Hello, everyone. We are now on a very interesting session, which is the dancing session. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, we are now on a very interesting and energetic session, of which we are going to boogie, boogie, boogie. I'm already in my dancing dress. Ready? Hello?
Should we play the music now? Can you explain to everybody?
Yes, let the music flow. We are starting with a music from the west part of Africa, which was sung by Yami Alade. In fact, she's one of my favorites. And aside the fact that we are going to use the song to song, it's also inspiring. It kind of tells us how we as Africans have a very rich culture. So let's enjoy. Mr. DJ, please let the music flow. As we dance, we listen to. Video.
Right. It's an African one. Yeah. Beats by Amazon. Yeah, me I like it. Something so. This my African hands, them gon' love you. Yeah. My African lips, them gon' kiss you. Whoa. My African hips get down to you. break dance. I bet you come here to shake hands. You come here to make plans. Never would it reach as motherland. Whether you come here to rock West, I mean not to find good. Everything they never would it reach as motherland. Anywhere you go, London, USA, nowhere be like Africa, nowhere be like home. Anywhere you go, New York, Chicago, nowhere be like Africa, nowhere be like home. Biko eruya wayo, wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini? Ayayaya, weruya wayo, wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini?
This my African artists will love you. This my African arms, they will squeeze you. Yeah. My African ears will listen to you. My Kenyan
I'm enjoying myself.
Na kama umekuja ku break dance, umekuja ku get down, umekuja ku take chance, hakuna matata kama umekuja kulipa kupiga dance hapo ulipo kata kiuno anywhere you go, London, USA, nowhere be like Africa, nowhere be like home. Anywhere you go, New York, Chicago, nowhere be like Africa, nowhere be like home.
Biko eruya wayo, wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini? Ayayaya, weruya wayo, wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini? Lele. It's an African one. In here a day. Soldier come, soldier go. Your home now your home. Irreplaceable. Anywhere you go. London, USA. Nowhere be like Africa. Nowhere be like home. Anywhere you go. New York, Chicago. Nowhere like Africa. Nowhere be like home. Biko eruya wayo. Wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini? Ayayaya, weruya wayo. Wayaka, karibu kiti, utapewa nini? Lele. Africa, Africa, yeah. Sweet like banana, baby.
Մենակ եմ աշխարհում առանց քեզ
Պապա յարը
Տենչում է իմ սիրտը միայն քեզ Լուր տանջվում է հոգիս արի տես Մենակ եմ աշխարհում առանց քեզ
Yes
Տենչում է իմ սիրտը միայն քեզ
Play live
Լուր տանջվում է հոգիս արի տես Ես խնդրում եմ մի գնա գնա իմ գրկում մնա Սրտի սրակը տանքես մենակ կողքից դու լինես Սրտի սրակը տանքես մենակ կողքից դու լինես
You hear me? Mr. Super Psycho, suits and coops in Morocco. While we keep a gangster, I move like a vato. I am the king, you're the queen of my castle. Give you everything if I got to. Yeah, I know you love me like French toast. Pacific coast, moving in the drop coast. You put your makeup on, I gotta drive slow. I know this life I'm living left you heartbroken. Also, mind over matter. I paid them no mind, and you all that matter. I messed up, I had you. Let's meet on a Saturday. Forget what they had to say. I gave you my heart like an Oklahoma. And all you left me with is your Chanel aroma. It's hell without you. I wish I cloned you. I'm contemplating whether if I should phone you. Yeah. Then I was born, now we touring Barcelona. Fly to Vegas, got a meeting with the owner.
I like the
house if you want to. I know the bullshit we've been through, make us stronger. If I get down on one knee, would you come back to me? Maybe we should talk about something the family. Actually, we could talk about the ring size. MGM and G fight sitting ringside. Keep her all made down, she don't mess with Levi's. That's how we do when you're messing with these guys. I mean me and myself and I mean me and my girl must stay fly. First class Versace on her eyelid. Private jets fly to Cuban islands. And when I mess up, I buy her diamonds. So Verin gitarët, u captu më të qehelni.
Last song, everybody. Get step. Ready? Yes. Enjoy yourself, everybody.
Jerusalem is
my favorite.
Ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana Jerusalem ikhaya lami ilondoloze uhambe nami zungangishilana dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze Ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami dawo yami ayikholana buso wami awukholana ilondoloze zuhambe nami Jerusalem ikhaya lami ilondoloze wami awukholana ilondoloze suhambe nami.
We have a Ghanaian version of the Jerusalem. I love this song.
Well, thank you so much, Vivian. We had so much fun. You really livened this all up. Thank you. And thank you for a fabulous break and for taking us through the dances.
I'm sweating.
Thank you so much, Vivian. That certainly gave us some energy and some vigor to continue with this very rich summit that we're having today. I must say, you know, guys, it's been really, really informative. The quality of the conversation, the speakers, and the participation from you guys on the chat. Thank you so much. You make this conference a success by really engaging with the content. And I really do implore you to continue to stay on. We have a fantastic rest of the agenda this afternoon. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to be able to introduce our next keynote address. And this keynote address is really, really important considering some of the conversations that we've had this morning. And it's entitled Access to Finance, an investment for growing youth-run enterprises across multiple African countries. We know as young people that accessing finance is tough. So I think this couldn't come at a more wonderful opportunity, especially now that we're armed with the opportunity. Now it's to say, how do we go about getting the finance? And to deliver this keynote address is Ms. Dorothy Ngambe Tembo, the Deputy Executive Director of the International Trade Center since June 2014. She's a Zambian national. She also serves she also served as the ITC Executive Director at interim from January to September 2020. And prior to her roles at the ITC, Ms. Tembo served as the Executive Director of the multi-donor funded Integrated Framework Program at the World Trade Organization. During her tenure there, from October 2008 to 2013, Ms. Tembo spearheaded the relaunch of the program, which supports least developed countries in addressing their trade-related technical assistance needs and supply-side constraints. From 2004 to 2008, Ms. Tembo served as Chief Trade Negotiator and Director of Foreign Trade in the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry of Zambia. In 2003 and 2004, Ms. Tembo served as a Trade and Investment Advisor on the USAID Zambia Trade and Investment Enhancement Project in Lusaka, providing support to the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Industry and the private sector. She holds a degree in economics from the University of Zambia. Ms. Tembo, are you there? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. And a very good afternoon to you.
Wonderful. Without any further ado, it is over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And thank you for those kind introductory words. A very warm good afternoon to all of you. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a real pleasure to join you in this important summit today. Truly heartwarming and energizing to see the incredible work being done by this youth-led initiative to amplify the voices of young Africans, but to also see the tremendous support and collaboration with a broad range of stakeholders that include government, private sector, and development organizations. I understand from my colleagues who have been following since morning and who have also been participating in the event that this morning really has been an illustration of this strong collaborative effort that is building up and moving in a direction that we all very much appreciate. Africa's growth and development rests in the hands of the current and subsequent generations of youth, which is why it is so important to foster and nurture youth talent and leverage opportunities that help manifest their entrepreneurial hopes and dreams. Our continent, from Cape to Cairo, is brimming with incredibly bright young entrepreneurs. Unlocking the potential of these entrepreneurs is vital for Africa's future. So much energy, so much drive and determination to pursue entrepreneurship, but it is also the reality that many of our young people still face many obstacles when starting up or trying to grow their businesses. From our work as an organization, one obstacle that always comes up in the context of our conversations with business is access to finance. It is the biggest challenge that micro, small, and medium enterprises face to doing business, particularly for those in developing countries, and more so for the least developed countries. The International Monetary Fund estimates that 40% of the micro, small, and medium enterprises from these regions have unmet financing needs. This issue just makes it very clear by looking at the sheer size of this financing gap, which stands at approximately $5.2 trillion as at now. Even where resources have actually been provided, it is our understanding from the work that we are undertaking in the different countries that accessibility by most micro, small, and medium enterprises still tends to be a challenge due to the various requirements. And I'll get a little bit in detail on that. When you dig deeper, we see that this issue is even more severe for youth-led enterprises, which tend to be smaller in size and have fewer assets. This situation further compounded by the COVID-19 impact. We took a survey in April of this year just to try and better understand what situation is confronting the business people. And from that survey, we have come to understand a lot of issues. And from that understanding, we have also been able to come up with very tailored responses that can help the businesses to be able to sustain themselves, but more so position for building better going forward. The survey, which we took from more than 1,200 micro, small, medium enterprises participants across 109 countries, highlighted that youth-led enterprises are at a higher risk of closing. About 26% of the youth-led firms that have stated that they risk shutting down permanently. And this is compared to the larger entities which stand at 18%. Largely, this is because they have not been able to access some of the stimulus packages. Neither have they been able to access loans where these are available because they're mainly considered to be very high risk. They are also very much aware that the accompanying service charges or indeed the interest that would be due is too high and unaffordable for their bracket of businesses. On the other hand, we have also established that young people lack essential skills such as financial literacy, business development skills, access to business networks, information on different markets, and the financial landscape. Not having these important skills puts them at a greater disadvantage as they are key factors to unlocking investment and finance. Addressing this challenge requires dedicated youth-sensitive interventions from a wide range of actors, including, of course, the banks and other types of financiers, governments, business support organizations, and indeed development organizations. It will take a coordinated and coherent approach for us to be able to find good solutions which are innovative and take into account the various concerns that the business entities have provided in the context of the work that we're doing, but also through the various research that has been undertaken, not only by ourselves, but various other partners working in this area. I wanted to give you the assurance that ITC is committed to this cause and works with many of these stakeholders to provide better prospects for youth entrepreneurs. So specifically, what is it that ITC has been doing in this space? First, we have acknowledged the fact that youth is a cross-cutting issue. So as an organization, we've taken a deliberate decision to mainstream youth in all our work. And all our work means in our project design, in our programming, in our planning, in our implementation. But what we have done going beyond that, recognizing that this is not enough, is to ensure that we have some accountability attached to that. So we're very specific in terms of trying to ensure that upfront we are defining very clearly what the expected outputs or indeed outcomes of any work we are doing, and that we remain accountable and have a clear reporting structure against that. We have made a commitment of ensuring that we generate employment for at least 100,000 youth by next year in the context of our contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. Second, specific to the programming, the ITC's Youth and Trade Program has partnered with a wide range of financiers to provide training on investment readiness and financial products and services. For instance, from July to October of this year, ITC through YE Community organized a number of webinars through YE's Enterprising Youth Connect, Connect series with the aim of connecting youth ventures with African investors. These webinars were broken up regionally and were led by youth entrepreneurs from the community. The webinars provided a space for young entrepreneurs to pose their questions directly to investors, breaking down barriers around knowledge, information, and expertise. This effort, whilst useful, is not enough on its own. It does not address the fact that youth remain significantly underserved by a wide range of financial institutions. The development of youth-inclusive financial products and services is therefore critical to addressing the financial needs of youth entrepreneurs. These measures can take many forms, from providing lower interest rates on financial products to reducing collateral requirements for youth-led businesses. The key message is that financiers must be part of the solution and must take the necessary steps to better serve young entrepreneurs. This obligation lies not only with the financiers, but also with governments, as a political will is a crucial component to unlocking greater capital for young entrepreneurs. And we have seen this in action in countries where this has come through. The results have been very good. Recognizing the importance of this issue, for example, the Gambian government initiated reforms to public finance, which resulted in a slight reduction of interest rates. The Gambian government also took additional steps to support youth entrepreneurs by working with ITC to develop customized financial solutions to better serve young entrepreneurs. In 2017, the National Association of Cooperative Credit Unions of the Gambia, a local financial institution licensed by the Central Bank, partnered with ourselves on the Youth Empowerment Project to develop 3 programs that have provided funding for entrepreneurs and businesses. The programs included 1, a mini grant scheme targeting grassroots entrepreneurs with the aim of making it possible for them to purchase equipment, materials, permits, and other business critical inputs. Second, a mini loan scheme which offers credit products at reduced interest and against modest collateral for entrepreneurs who are unable to access bank credit. And finally, and most recently, the establishment of Angel Investors Network, which offers access to both capital and from seasoned entrepreneurs. These interventions create a more supportive ecosystem in the Gambia for new and growing businesses and have delivered strong results. Since the implementation, the program has disbursed 353 mini grants and unlocked over 165,920 United States dollars worth of loans to youth-owned businesses through the mini loan grant scheme. The Gambia Angels Investor Network is also a growing player in entrepreneurship and access to finance in the ecosystem, and has already closed its first investment in a women-owned company in the fashion sector. It is also important to provide vital financial support. The program has in this regard also adapted to the changing needs of the young entrepreneurs. Following an assessment of the impact of coronavirus pandemic on mini grant beneficiaries, which found 82% of the guarantees did not have enough cash flow to support their businesses beyond 3 months, ITC and NACCUG set up a COVID-19 emergency fund. This initiative provides a small cash transfer which helps businesses to continue operations and sustain jobs during the challenging period. I think the bottom line there is that we need to make sure that we are agile and innovative in responding to different situations that the small players are confronted with. Lastly, ITC provides support through the YE community, an online community of more than 17,000 young entrepreneurs around the world. YE links young entrepreneurs to various tools and resources, such as coaching with experienced professionals for one-on-one support. YE also connects young entrepreneurs to funding opportunities via pitching events and our global network. And we will continue to expand as we better understand and indeed identify very specific solutions that could fit very firmly within the context of this initiative. Let me conclude by sharing my constant awe of the talented young entrepreneurs across Africa, and I'm very confident in your abilities to lead this continent forward. However, it remains imperative for the various actors I have mentioned to provide additional support to enable the right ecosystem and create innovative ways to help them to do so. I trust in all of you. This is the Africa we are looking for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tembo. I mean, those words are powerful. I trust you all. I think I actually got goosebumps by the faith that you have in the young people on this continent, as well as the actors and players that work across this continent to actually make youth entrepreneurship and development a success. Thank you so much for that really, really informative speech. And I mean, one of my biggest takeaways is you said we need to be agile and we need to be innovative, because we understand that on this continent, we have varied, bespoke, and nuanced needs as young entrepreneurs. And as a result of that, it requires a collective and collaborative approach to be able to truly meet some of this 5.2 trillion financing gap that we have on this continent. So thank you again. On behalf of all the participants, that was really amazing. Thank you so much. And colleagues, with without any further ado, it's my pleasure now to move on in terms of our program and introduce you to our next panel. Now, our next panel is entitled Resuscitating Africa's Supply Chain, Positioning by Youth-Run Businesses to Leverage
I'm just running up and down.
The African Continental Free Trade Area for Trade Development. Now, we are going to be delighted by some presentations from some of these youth-run businesses that currently exist on the continent. And therefore, it is, I'm proud to introduce the panel moderator, Priti Toho. She is the Operations Director for YALDA Botswana and a seasoned human resources expert in Botswana. Priti, over to you. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you so much. Hello, I am delighted to be the moderator for this panel, the second panel of the day. Before we go any further, I'm going to introduce my panelists very soon. However, I would like to request a name to their own name. If you could please do that, it will be easier for us to have the chat, right? And then to everybody who's listening in, please do type in your questions in the Q&A so that if we do have time later on, the panelists are able to see your questions easily. Okay. So, my name is Priti Toho. I am based in Gaborone, Botswana, and I am again delighted to be moderating today's second panel of the day. The panel the discussion is going to be titled Resuscitating Africa's Supply Chain, Positioning by Youth-Run Businesses to Leverage the ACTA for Trade Development. All right, so to give you a little bit of background on what we're going to be doing. Over the years for goods and services in Africa, undoubtedly efficient supply chains are crucial to local, regional, and national economic development, which with time become continental and worldwide. However, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit with its attendant lockdowns to curb the spread of the virus, it resulted in a supply shock recession, which slowed the expansion of supply chain by at least 35%, thereby hindering the growth of businesses across borders. Recent shortages of essential products like food, medicine, toiletries, sanitizers, etc. around Africa prompted a deeper appreciation for the supply chain systems. Supply chain goes from reaching the intended market and the people who need and rely on them. Given the uncertainty that we face around the pandemic, it is prudent to embrace the new normal. So how does the supply chain adapt to this new normal? With the inventions of African youth, there is the development of exportable technology and growth of sustainable businesses in trade. What this panel today will do is that it will equip you guys as the delegates with an understanding of how best to leverage the AFTA for trade development by positioning youth-run businesses, thus resuscitating the African supply chain. So helping me to unpack this topic today, I have a number of esteemed guests, experts in their own fields, and I'm just going to list them out briefly. Firstly, we have Nicolette Builani Muduku, who is the founder of Walking the African Journey. I see Nicolette is here in the chat. We also have Mohamed El Kafafi. Please forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. And Mohamed is the founder of Agrona. We also have Gilbert Mwale, who is the founder of MCICA in Zambia. Also joining us is Daniel Ndima, who is the founder of Cape Biotechnologies. And last but not least, we have Dr. Francis Mangeni, who is the AFTA Head Trade Promotions and Programs. So esteemed panelists, we are very, very glad to have you with us today. We look forward to your views. Again, if you haven't changed your name, please do your display name, right? So what we're gonna start with, there's gonna be a general question that all the panelists are gonna be expected to answer, and thereafter there'll be specific questions. So the opening question, COVID-19 disrupted global supply chain, leaving many countries, especially those in Africa, with little or no alternative. Interestingly, some countries have begun efforts to build a self-sustaining supply chain so as to withstand external shocks, utilizing backward integration, amongst others. The AFTA promises to strengthen the continent's supply chain. How can this be achieved in view of recent developments and disruptions caused by COVID-19? All right, so I'm going to hand over to Nicolette, first and foremost, if you could take us through on that one. Nicolette, I trust you're here.
Yes, I'm here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. I'll say thank you so much for the honor of having us on this panel. And it's been great since morning, and we are excited to be part of this. So what I'm going to take you into, just responding to this question, is I think the advent of COVID-19 from the business side or from the small business side was actually a blessing in disguise if we look at it this way. We have managed to eventually look at things that we've been trying to address in Africa as businesses, but we haven't, been given that time, or we haven't had that opportunity to address it. So I would say how to go around this is mindset change and design thinking for starters. This, the cutting of supply chain and the stopping or the reduced flow of goods into Africa from the West or from the East actually forced us as African business owners or as people in the business world to actually start thinking differently about how we go about business, how we go about supplies, how we go about the natural resources that we have within the continent. So I would say what we've learned as small businesses, as Africans, must firstly learn to identify the problems in their communities, in their districts, nations, countries, and actually spill over into their region. So we start identifying problems and predicaments and how to actually solve those problems by supplying goods or services on our own. I'll just give a random example of health. With the COVID-19 problem, we could not access test kits. In the first months of lockdown, we couldn't access test kits. And I know Senegal became very innovative and they made their own rapid tests that worked for them and were accurate. For me, that was an example of how we can actually start promoting our own businesses, start stimulation of ideas within our societies to start solving our own problems. So that's the first thing for me. Let's start solving our African problems the African way with the resources that we have at the moment. And then the second thing is the use, like I said, the use of resources and inputs, not only in our countries, but in our neighboring countries. If I have water in my water as a resource in my country, let me look next door and see if probably they have, they have herbs for health and something like that. Let's start working together by looking at our neighbors first. before we actually start looking further and far. And this way, we are able to empower the local businesses. We are actually able to empower the local entrepreneurs that are coming up with solutions that would not look at if everything was normal, if COVID-19 hadn't happened. And for me, the biggest potential for Africa actually lies within trading with itself. Let's start practically supplying each other. Let's start practically supplying each other with things that we don't have, whether it's a service, it's goods, it's services. Let's start supplying each other. We have 53 countries in Africa, and I bet every person has, every country has a slice in the pizza or in the pie or in the cake. So let's start trading within ourselves. Our borders are not so far from each other, which makes it cheaper for us to move around goods and supply each other with goods. So working together and collaboration is very, very important. Like I said, I'm focusing solely on mindset change and design thinking because this is where it starts. And then as small businesses or as Africans, we should also start thinking ahead. I think when we saw what happened with COVID-19 and supply and business, we should start thinking ahead. We always have a plan A, but let's have a plan B, C, D, and E. Let's have alternative plans for either business disaster, natural disaster, or whatever it is. So we can supply each other with goods or services should anything go wrong. I'm going to give another example in the energy sector. For example, if we are countries in the Southern African region, I would say Zimbabwe has coal, Angola biogas, Zambia has hydropower, and South Africa probably would have nuclear power. How do we start supporting each other with all these resources in energy that we have and use it effectively so that should Zambia fall and should anything happen, we all come on board and we help it. We help Zambia and small businesses within the energy sector within the region. So let's come with alternative plans or plan B, C, and D for predicaments, and that way we diversify, we critically think, we're innovative, and we have so many platforms for us to develop businesses within the African sector. And another thing is in that collaboration that we are doing within the supply chain, we should actually start thinking not only regionally but globally. How do we come together and fight food security and then sell our surplus to other continents or other parts of the world? How do we do that? Because if we do that together, become a community, and then that way we'll be able to actually reap more results. So for me, it's countries, it's diversify, it's let's start doing all these things collaboratively, innovatively, and let's start competing at a global stage. Because I think if we come together and collaborate, I think that's the answer. Let's start thinking global. What do we have? How do we use it? And how do we make it attractive or sell it to the rest of the world? But most importantly, making sure that we are okay as businesses or as countries and that we are self-sufficient. Should anything happen, we are okay. We can, let's start being innovative and self-sufficient. So yeah, so for me, that's it. Let's change our mindsets. Let's be innovative and start thinking ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Nicolette. That was highly informative. You know, I like it that you talked about identifying problems in our own communities and then coming up with our own solutions that work for us and ensuring that we promote that intra-African trade and spirit. So thank you very much for that. And also thank you for sticking to your 5 minutes. I appreciate it. As an aside, Nicolette, people in the chat are loving your earrings. So please do let us know where you got them from so that we support
I made these on my own. So yeah, I made this. It's a DIY project.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's amazing. Are you selling? Now that
Yes,
we're here,
I
we're talking
am.
intra-African
Yes,
trade.
I am. Thank you.
All right, cool. Are you welcome? Okay, so our next panelist to tackle the question around the question that I asked previously is Mohammed Al-Kafafi. Mohammed, I'm unsure whether you are here. I can't see you. If you are, please unmute. Oh, there you are. Hello, Mohammed. How are you?
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction, and I'm very happy to speak today. This is Voice from Egypt, and I'm glad to be among my African friends. I would like to speak about the condition now after being hit by COVID for African countries. For Africa, the intra-trade among African countries is less than 17% of the African trade. If we compare this to other African, countries in Asia, for example, it will reach 60%, and it will reach 70% in Europe. So we can see here that we have low numbers for trade among African countries. If Africa had implemented agreements and frameworks such as AFCAFTA, Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, and the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, and the Accelerated Industrial Development for African Plan, all of this, our economies would have been more diversified, stronger, and less affected by the COVID. For example, South Africa, where the UMask has redirected its production from protective masks for mining and agriculture to that for medical respiratory masks. And Nigeria, where the National Agency for Science and Engineering Infrastructure produced made-in energy ventilators. In Egypt as well, we have startups worked on making ventilators at the middle of the COVID in April and May, and there is no companies in any place in the world would supply any country with those equipments because they are not sufficient in their places. They are not sufficient in the States. General Motors started to produce ventilators just to supply the local needs in the States. So we have some initiatives inside our countries with creative young youth where they started seeing the problem as opportunity, and they start doing this. COVID-19 on Africa have hit around 300,000 to 3.3 million African. This is the projections that health organizations said. Those people could lose their lives as a direct result of the pandemic. Therefore, given the urgent need for government to focus efforts on protecting lives from COVID-19, they postpone the agreements of the AFCFTA to Jan 2021. Such delay offers a window of opportunity for creative thinking on how the AFCAFTA can be reconfigured to reflect the new realities and risks of the 21st century. This is needed to better position the African economy in the face of future adverse shocks emanating from novel viruses and climate change, among others. Africa needs to diversify its sources of supply chain. Even developed countries that depended on only one or two countries for critical parts of their supply chain are now talking localization production. This is happening now in Egypt and many other African countries. So COVID-19 has already shed the light to the developing countries in Africa to search and see what the value chains that we need and we can give a priority in our industrial systems. So that to solve this, as my colleague said before, that we need to think creative. We need to be more creative about how our existing development frameworks could be adapted to emerging opportunities generated by this crisis. So I would like to say, in order to apply such agreements on the ground, we need to attract more investment. We need to attract more investment. And I see that there is a lot of investment among African people, among African investors. And also we can attract investment from the other Western companies or Asian countries. So they can invest in the infrastructure in our countries in order to develop the logistics and develop the enables for such trade agreement. So this was my point, and I would like to leave the space to the other panelists, and I will talk again about how can we do, how government can do more about such agreement to boost the supply chain. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very, very much for that, Mohamed. I appreciate your thoughts on the matter. And I loved everything you said about how we need to diversify our sources of supply as a continent. All right, next up, we have Gilbert Male, who is the founder of MSICA in Zambia. Gilbert, the floor is, please remember to keep to 5 minutes. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Just to keep that, I have put myself on a timer pretty so that we do not go above time. Hi, everyone. I'm Gilbert Mwale, co-founder and CEO of MSICA, and we are based in Zambia. MSICA is simply an agtech company that is digitizing several processes and activities in the agricultural sector. Currently, we are solving the problem of poor access to farm inputs in rural and peri-urban areas of Zambia, with plans, obviously, of scaling that across borders, and definitely that is why we are sitting on this panel to talk about this with everyone here. We do this by connecting suppliers and manufacturers to farmers and agro-retailers via an online marketplace, while providing farming advisory services via an e-learning portal to farmers who need assistance. Now, having said that, the question at hand that I would want to respond to is what Preeti has mentioned, which is to say, how can we be able to build a self-sustaining supply chain in view of recent developments and disruption caused by the COVID-19? Firstly, I would like to pass my condolences before I go too far. My condolences to everyone that has lost someone due to the pandemic out there. Most especially, I think we saw the numbers escalate in places like Egypt. So that is to you, Muhammad, and everybody joining in from there. And a quick recovery to those that are currently affected as we speak. We are cordially with you and we hope for a quick recovery. As an economy, which is Africa to be specific, I think we need to do a following things in addition to what my two colleagues have already mentioned. Firstly, I would like to say that we need to make a resolve that we as Africans are not just good consumers, but we can produce if we put our mind and hands to it. So a lot of us have done a lot of lip service, but it is quite critical that just like Nicolette, who looked beautiful with her earrings, but we found out that she made them. So she spoke well and she made well, and that's the Africa I would like to see. This resolve that I'm talking about must not only just be due to anger that you do not have enough, but rather be a conviction that you'd like to do more. Secondly, we need to see that youth-led already existing businesses are helped to grow by offering them things like tax breaks, lower interest loans for machinery required, as it is not about the number of SMEs that exist in a particular country, but rather on the quality of SMEs that are there, quality of small businesses that we are seeing grow. That is what makes a difference, because in the near future, we know that those will turn into the big companies that we expect. The last third thing I would like to push out is that we'd like to provide, it should be important that skills transfer happen. Because for manufacturing to transpire, most cases, you have to see specialized skills, talent, and human resources in an area. So skills transfer, and not only in hardware creation, but let us understand that the world has moved on into another environment called the knowledge economy. So before the bus is long gone for us as Africa, how can we begin to educate the young people that Amazon.com, to be specific, an American company, is worth more than all the gold that is being mined in South Africa, or the GDP of some of the biggest countries in Africa, and yet it does not push any kind of physical product in any way. Now, that means as governments, our leaders need to understand that when you allow businesses like these to grow, by giving them those tax breaks and low incentive loans, they will be able to have, as a government, in 5 or more years, enough money to receive in taxes in billions from these SMEs. So my simple cry in this preamble is that let SMEs breathe. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Gilbert. Short and sweet, to the point. Also, a lot of people are business in the chat. There's a lot of this. We'll be able to see it. Okay, so this is the founder of Cape Biotechnology.
Thank you, Pretty. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I think, Grant, thanks for the invite, and to you and your team, to my fellow panelists and the attendees. I think it's a privilege for me to be here. My name is Dan Ndima. I'm from South Africa. I'm a scientist by profession, trained in structural biology, more specifically in crystallography. So I'm more of a drug developer. I then ventured into bio-entrepreneurship about 6 years ago. And my company really leveraged on African indigenous biological resources, especially the biodiversity hotspots, to source for enzymes that are used in diagnostics applications, but more so in peptides that can be used for drugs development, among other biological molecules. So we're an IP company that solely rely on developing its own IP coming out of African biological resources. So I think the topic for today actually resonates with some of the engagements that I've had before around how do we share capabilities in Africa so that we increase the efficacy of ensuring that we share resources, but not only that we share resources that are aligned in terms of values, but that will have a lot of impact. I think now, let me go back a bit with regards to where we are now. The system that we have in Africa, in as far as these value chains are concerned, it was designed a long time ago. I think what we're trying to do now and what we are grappling with basically is to try to build, on top of the map, because the foundation was never laid for Africans. Therefore, it can never work for Africans. So if we ought to go back a little bit and understand, the foundational discrepancies around, this trade, malfeasance, if you like, if we can go back and really check where we're getting everything wrong. In Africa we have the best skills, best business ideas. We've got youth population. We are innovative, yet we don't really cross-pollinating as far as our products and services are concerned. And there's a reason why it's so difficult for someone sitting in Malawi to be able to trade with someone that's sitting in Angola. And that was by design. It's not something that was just there. And we just need to figure out, how to unchain that so that we develop, an African way of trading with each other. I think the foundation is very important for me, especially with regards to how we share these resources. If you look at the Asian economies, how they are, how their logistics are designed, and how everything is shared in between countries is different from how Europe does such activities. It's also different in how America does that. So if we're going to replicate what those continents are doing into Africa, we're going to fail, because we've got the west, east, and north and south sides of Africa, which are likely to adopt a certain model. So we need to find an African way of trading between each other. And you wonder why you have a Chinese rail, Ethiopia and Kenya. It's not designed for African benefits, it's designed for Chinese benefits. So you look at some things like that, and this is a history repeating itself, and how we get disrupted as a result. When we face pandemics of this nature, we tend to struggle because we didn't build our own systems, our own foundation. So it's also very important to understand that what this does is that it puts cost margin on all products and services. For instance, most of the products in Africa are between 50 and 75% of the margin is made up of transportation, and that alone tells you about the loopholes within our supply chain systems. So we really need to figure out how we can create very sophisticated systems that are more applicable to African context. If you look at South Africa, Morocco, Egypt, for instance, they've got very sophisticated supply chain systems, but those systems are not really, impacting the neighboring, countries, and because they speak to different, aspects of other, cut and paste models that we're taking somewhere. So if we ought to have this, solid ground going forward, we really need to relook at, what really went wrong during the colonial times, because that is where the disruption happened, and that disruption happened, it dispossessed us of our value chains that we already had in place, that we needed to modify and make sure that we succeed. But in doing so, I think it's very important for us to define the type of African leadership think tank we need to have that will design these supply chain systems. We also need to have an African business think tank, but more so we need to have an African knowledge think tank that can really help us in terms of designing these new systems. I think what we are trying to do now, what we're trying to rush into, is to ride a train while it's moving, because the train has been moving for some time. We haven't stopped it. I think it's time to stop it and relook at it and say, we don't need this type of train. Maybe we need the one that is branded Africa. I thank you.
All right. Thank you very, very much for that, Daniel. Very insightful comments. Again, I see a theme running through. We're talking a lot about developing African-centered solutions, not copying and pasting what other continents are doing, but thinking about what we can do for ourselves as a people. All right, so I have my video off for now because I have noted that I do have a network issue. So just so that you are able to hear me, I will leave my video off. Okay, to call on the speaker to answer this question, I'm just gonna hand over to Dr. Francis Mangeni, who is the AFTA Head Trade Promotions and Programs. Dr. Mangeni, if you could also change your name, you are displaying as Lana Bugamo. If you could change that to your own name.
How did that happen? All right, I'll do
The
that.
floor is yours. Please.
Yeah, right. Pretty, could you please allow me to share a screen if you don't mind? Right. Right. So I have just about 5 slides, which I would like to share with you, my brothers and sisters, friends and comrades, during this session. Now, the first one is simply to recall that we have gone through 4 major epochs in modern history as Africa. From 1900 to, I would say 1963, that was the period of Pan-Africanism when we were mobilizing to start fighting decolonization. Of course, earlier on, it was about improving the conditions of colonial peoples. And then from 1963, when we formed the Organization for African Unity, up to 1990, we successfully achieved the decolonization of Africa with the independence of Namibia and the release of Nelson Mandela. And then after that, we moved towards economic Pan-Africanism from 1991 up to 2013. So in 1991, we had the Abuja Treaty, which set out the vision for creating the African Economic Community over a period of 34 years. That's by 2028, and we are on track. Then in the year 2000 up to 2002, we formed the African Union, and we have been much stronger as Africa on the global scene. And then in the year 2013, we adopted Agenda 2063, which is the 4th epoch which we are now in. Agenda 2063, which was adopted in 2013, is a 50-year blueprint towards the Africa we want, for creating the Africa we want by the year 2063. And this is the Africa which is peaceful, prosperous, and internationally efficacious or influential. Now, to have this Africa we want, we must have the Africans we want. You, my brothers and sisters, myself. We have to be better versions of ourselves as individuals, progressively. As communities, we have to be better versions of ourselves. As countries, we have to be better versions of ourselves. And then as Africa, we shall be better versions of ourselves. So this is the first point I'd like to make. Now, the second point is, what is the African Continental Free Trade Area? It is a single African market made up of all the 55 countries, covering trading goods, services, dispute settlement, investment, intellectual property, competition, and e-commerce. So it is a comprehensive modern 21st century agreement that ensures that we have a functional market, a single market where there's free movement of goods, services, people, capital, investment, and so on and so forth. And it's based on a negotiated agreement, which was signed on the 21st of March 2018 and entered into force on 30th of May 2019. This means it's a legally binding agreement. It's a clear legal framework. Now, what's the value proposition of the African Continental Free Trade Area? Why do we keep talking about it? Together, as Africa, we form the 11th biggest economy in the world. This means we have a punch. Returns on investment are estimated at 6.5%, which is higher than in developed countries, where it's estimated to be at 6%, according to the Overseas Development Institute. Now, we have a $3.4 trillion economy. Consumer and business spending is estimated to be $4 trillion annually, and we are more than 1.2 billion people, all consumers. We are a young continent. Median age is 19.7 years, meaning we are full of ideas, we are full of energy, and this is why actually YALDA is very appropriate. 60% of the world's arable land is in Africa here, and we have got tremendous natural resources, as we know very well. Now, is it all doom and gloom? No, the post-COVID recovery in Africa is estimated to be 3.1 next year in 2021 by the IMF. So what this means is that Africa is the place to be for trade, for investment, for innovation. If you want to do business, Africa is the happening place. Now, what do the people of Africa expect? If implemented, the African Continental Free Trade Area will pull 100 million people out of poverty, 30 million out of extreme poverty, 68 million out of poverty levels, or for those who live on less than $5 a day. It is an instrument for socio-economic transformation, but we must be, as I just said earlier, the Africans we want in order to have the Africa we want. So what should actors do? And this includes yourselves, myself, the public sector, the private sector, academia, civil society. So the economic operators should use the AfCFTA trade instruments in order to make it happen, in order to trade under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area regime. All of us should lobby governments and its regulatory agencies to continuously improve the AfTA trading regime so that it's equitable and nobody is left behind. We should form and join active public, private sector, academia partnerships as dialogue platforms to continuously improve the system, to get input for what needs to be done best in terms of policy. And we must champion women, youth, and SMEs if the African Continental Free Trade Area is to be inclusive, if it's to be owned by the ordinary people. And as economists will tell us, we need to continuously bring on board new products, new industries for economies to grow. So we need innovation and the entrepreneurial education, meaning that we need graduates who come out of school, not just with certificates, with diplomas, with degrees, but also with business ideas, with bankable projects ready to commercialize their passions, their skills, and their ideas. So this is what we need to do. Now, here are some examples of what can happen. And I'm glad that my good friend Stephen Karing will be on the next panel this afternoon. He will maybe explain this a little bit more. The Africa Medical Supplies Platform, which we have established as Africa, finding our solutions to our problems, is a platform for trading, for producing, supplying, and importing pharmaceutical products, medicines, to deal with the COVID pandemic. And so far, I have been informed by my good friend Stephen that deals worth more than $200 million have already been concluded on this platform. Anybody, SMEs, women, youth, can upload their products onto this platform, receive orders, and supply. Under the Continental Free Trade Area, we are planning to establish the Africa Trade Observatory, which will be a market intelligence platform for trading. Innovation Awards. I happen to have this story, which I like telling people, that in my previous life, when I worked with COMESA, I used to run a program for Innovation Awards. Now, there was one year when a young boy, aged 25 years, won this award. And within 4 years, he had commercialized his idea, his invention, and had made it to the Africa Forbes list, 4 years only. Now, we need incubation centers as well in order to help our young people to turn their ideas into actually businesses. So that's why the African. All right, now actually I have finished. Yeah, I had actually finished. I had actually finished. Pretty, thank you so much. Dear delegates, thank you so much. These are my contacts if you'd like to get in touch with me. And good luck to everybody. Over and out.
All right, thank you very, very much for that, Dr. Mangeni. That was highly, highly informative. Unfortunately, you only have 1 hour. I was enjoying that, and everybody else was. All right, the call from Dr. Mangeni, you know, we have to be the Africans we want in order to build the Africa we want. So that is a good question for us all to self-reflect. Okay, so we have a few minutes left on this panel. I do have a couple questions for the panelists again. Again, we're running out of time, so I'm just gonna ask everybody to please be very, very brief. Please keep your answer to 1 minute or less, just so we're able to cover everything. So my first question is for you, Nicolette. The implementation of the AfTA is hinged on addressing the continent supply chain challenges in terms of efficiency and timely delivery. What strategic steps can African-based companies adopt in ensuring that they leverage on the opportunities in the AFTA to gain African-wide footprint in getting inputs for the production process? That was a mouthful, but I hope you got that. Nicolette?
And I have to answer it in a minute. Okay, I'll just try and rush through and summarize it. So I think the most important thing that we should do as small businesses, I'm a pig farmer and a food security expert. So I would say let's start with local acquisition of inputs. So, because that way distribution is easier, even for the end product, and to make use of local skill and local people that you employ, because they understand the local and regional market conditions, environment conditions, and the demand. They are the consumers as well. So I think local acquisition is very important. Let's buy local or regionally. Free tariff control, quickly, tariff control, free trade zones. Let's make use of that. Let's just not sit and wait for laws or rules to be passed or to be done away with. As private sector and small businesses, let's come together and push the government and push the legislature to actually make favorable trade or business rules for us, because some of them are outdated. And we need to actually make that noise so that they do that. Just like here in Southern Africa, there's the SADC certificate. If you buy local and you prove that you bought a thing that was manufactured within SADC, you pay less tariffs from wherever you're importing compared to products that are coming out elsewhere. So I think I'll just end there since I've got a minute and give my other panelists, time to respond to their questions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Nicolette. The next will be for Hamed, the founder of Agrona. Hamed, although the ACTA was signed in 2018, there have been increasing border closures by many African countries on grounds of protecting the economy, which is against the spirit of ACTA. This was exacerbated by COVID-19 and resultant lockdowns to curb the spread of the virus. However, this has caused irreparable damages to companies conducting cross-border trade. And what measures can governments put in place to assuage needs, promote cross-border trade in goods and services?
Okay, yes, I can see here, as my my colleague said, that to have unifying origin rules of products, systems like that will ease or simplify the process of trading for SMEs and startups as well. And I can see that having a unified payment system among African countries, also this would support the trading process and becomes more easy than before. Another point it's very important for entrepreneurs like me. I'm a founder of a startup company in the wood sector. We are making wood without cutting single tree out of agriculture residues. So currently we are working with many companies among Africa. In Togo, we are working with companies to license our technology. In Kenya as well, we are working with companies to license our technology and start doing this business in those countries. So actually, we are facing a problem in getting data, getting statistics. This is very important if we want to start making business among African countries. We need to have a system, a platform where every country put their trades, put their needs, how much exports, how much imports, about the skilled workers in every sector. We need to understand everything if you would like to attract investment, if you would like to start business very fast and very quickly. This is also very important. Last but not least, we need to establish a funding account for entrepreneurs and for startups in Africa, just for entrepreneurs and creative ideas. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to receive any questions after this call. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much for that. I'm just going to straight because we are running out of time. To apply and increase cross-border trade in Africa, there is the need to increase in-country presence of companies in manufacturing. What concessions and or incentives are required to attract these investments, leveraging on the provision of the AFTA?
Thank you very much for that good question. And I'll quickly get into it. So I'd just like to give quickly what has happened in the manufacturing sector around the world, what COVID has done. So China being one of the largest manufacturing country, they saw their industry production shrink by about 13.8% for the year-on-year change shown in February 2020, and that could be worse right now. And this has not happened ever since 1976. For the US, the regional manufacturing activity dropped from a 3-year high to its lowest since 2012. And this has led to about 3.3 million job losses due to claims made as a proof for that. And in summary, the UN simply estimates that COVID-19 could cause up to a $2 trillion shortfall in global income. That is without even mentioning Africa's situation. So as for Africa, almost all our raw materials are exported for processing elsewhere. We all know that a chocolate bar is worth more than a raw cocoa. Truckload of copper that Zambia produces weighs nothing compared to a ton of copper wires. Live chickens that we are always trying to sell at versus well-dressed packaged chickens. I think COVID-19 was a good sign that we need to increase the pace of backward integration. I would like to use Zambia as an example. For local manufacturing to thrive, the government has had to put a few things in place, and they still have to do more. Number one, concerning the policies and the concessions, we're talking about policies, infrastructure. E.g., we have been able to see in Zambia multi-facilities economic zones built, which are being used by the larger tier of big commercial companies. But on the smaller side, they have been able to set up youth industrial villages that we want to see more of in Zambia and other countries to support SMEs, road networks for transportation of raw materials and final products to market, power supply. Example, you can go on and on. Each African country is endowed with something precious that may either be processed or supplied to another country that may be processing them in bulk. Remember, the key issue there is bulk. This is a challenge right now, as I remember a friend who is a youth from Nigeria. She runs an amazing business of supplying processed dry fruits to chain stores, which is good, but she still struggles to get her processed fruits out into Togo as a market. But they may rather get them from Brazil. A paradox as Africans. Digitization and the AfCFTA could actually help strongly when implemented rightly in breaking such barriers by allowing us to use rules of origin for traceability and reduced custom rates and paperwork for members. And therefore, I submit that it is important for all of us here to sit around and think about it, for us to push the AfCFTA rule out on full scale. We need to conclude as individuals within our countries and beyond on matters of route of origin, concerns by local small businesses in different countries with booming economies, transition structures for immigration, so that we do not have genocide problems. With that, I re-mention to say that allow the SMEs to breathe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for that, Gilbert. Very thought-provoking. Daniel, the next question is for you. Daniel Ndima, founder of Cape Biotechnologies. Given Africa's deficit infrastructural challenges, which impact on the level of sophistication on the continent's supply chain and reliance on external supply chain, any external shocks negatively impact the continent's economy. Should these infrastructures be private sector driven, or government should devise alternative funding mechanisms through issuance of long-term securities? Again, that's a mouthful, but then the floor is yours.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. Thanks again for that question. I think it's very important for us to understand that, I think I'll repeat that the structure of the African economy was never designed for Africans, right? It was designed to exploit and take. So if you ask, who should drive this infrastructural, development? So, who has the money? Our governments are broke. They don't have money. And the money is being taken all the time. So to create, inner capacity, you need to follow what Gilbert is saying, give SMEs a space to breathe. Meaning this has to be a multi-sector approach, because infrastructure development is part of young people to participate, right? So there are few things that I want to highlight here quickly. In fact, there are two. One is the importance of collaboration and sharing of abilities. Where we're sitting as a company, we have reagents for diagnostics. We have reagents for many scientific applications that anyone sitting, whether you're sitting in Egypt, Kenya, Uganda, we can easily share, and we are free to share those resources. So what infrastructure is it required for a particular person sitting somewhere in Nigeria to do what we are doing in Nigeria to service the West African market, for instance? That's what we are trying to do. It requires that both private sector and public sector are involved in as far as positioning such an individual or such an entrepreneur in a position where they have all the regulatory approvals, which are red tapes across Africa. So you can source a product from East Africa, right? But do you have enough resources to be able to establish that so that you can have a straightforward value chain that you can share with the rest of the continent? So this has to be a multi-sector approach. It doesn't have to be a private sector alone or government sector. It has to be, even the startups need to participate in as far as building these blocks. And hence I said earlier on that we need to pause a bit and relook at our model and our approach so that we can paint our moving train with African flags. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. The last question is to Dr. Francis Mangeni, who is the After Promotions and Programs. Dr. Mangeni, an efficient supply chain has the potential to employ a lot of young people who will be engaged in every of the supply chain. In what ways can small companies develop an efficient cross-border supply chain to deliver their goods services across Africa using the provisions of floor is yours. Mangeni. Are you still with us? Are you? Okay, so we seem to be having a technical challenge with Dr. Mangeni. I'm just gonna maybe say we should close this now because unfortunately we won't hear his point of this question, and time is already left us. Okay. So with that, I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for taking part in this discussion. It was a robust discussion. I really wish we had more time to unpack everything that was said. For me, the key takeaways, it's important that we as Africans, we as the youth sit down and identify the problems that we have in terms of our supply chain. And then from there, we need to be the ones to come with local solutions that will work for us as a continent and as a people. And then lastly, we should encourage trade amongst one another as opposed to other continents before we build our own networks here. And then I just want to view with the words by Dr. Mangeni around the importance of being the best versions of ourselves so that Africa can be the best continent that we want it to be. All right, Grant, over to you.
Thank you so much, Priti, for delivering such an informative panel. You know, I think I'm really getting quite excited as this day goes by. You know, the food for thought, the thought-provoking statements and phrases, and the call to action that we all need to adhere to is really it's lightening up my day, and certainly it's such a great and positive outcome of what we're trying to achieve in this particular summit today. And there's something I'll take with me, you know, in order to build the Africa we want, we have to be the Africans that we need to be. And I will just leave with that point. Thank you very much. And maybe just to continue now on our agenda, we now have a reflection and networking session. This is the last networking session for the day. And it will be run by our co-conveners. So please use this opportunity to engage with one another and to reflect on some of the rich food and information that has been given to us today. Thank you, and over to the conveners.
Bitania, over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope we haven't lost a lot of participants. Let me exit my, hold on. Okay, we have 178 participants. We have about 50 panelists on the call. I'm very excited to see the large numbers. So I would like to invite Mr. Michael Koto and Guy Futi for this session. I see a number of panelists still have Laone Bukamu's name, so if you can kindly rename your names, change your names to your actual name so I can identify who's on the call. So kindly check your name if it's not yours, if it's listed as Laone Bukamu, can you rename it? Okay, great. So in this breakout session, we will have two presentations or speakers. The first speaker would be Mr. Michael Koto, who will make a presentation of the report from the Afro Champions report. I'll give the floor to Michael.
All right. Hello. Good afternoon from Accra, in Ghana. I trust that everyone is well, and congratulations again on a very well organized virtual summit. I've enjoyed the conversations, and it's a pleasure to join you. I'm here today in my capacity as head of strategy and research at the Afro Champions initiative. And today I will be presenting a very important report that Afro Champions released earlier this year in May, which we call the AFCFTA Year Zero report. And the CFTA Year Zero report is basically a report that Afro Champions put together that was designed to be a baseline study to try to measure the level of commitment and the level of implementation readiness of various African countries, which have either signed or ratified the CFTA agreement. So remember that originally AfCFTA implementation was supposed to begin in July 2020, and then the pandemic happened. And because of the pandemic, the start of trade had to be postponed to early 2021. And so the report was released in May 2020, and it was originally intended to stimulate discussion just a few months to start of trade, and to encourage governments and citizens and businesses and all stakeholders in the continent to have a sense of where the continent was, in terms of implementation of the agreement. So I did share a copy of the report to the organizers, and I've encouraged them to share it with everybody so you can see what the report looks like. But in this brief presentation, I'm going to show a few slides, and I'll take you through what the report tried to achieve and what the findings look like. So if I can, is it possible for me to share my screen? Okay.
Yes. Great.
Let me see. Okay. All right, I think. So the reports, which was, again, as I said, was basically an assessment of the level of commitment and readiness of African governments and African countries for AfCFTA start of trade. If you talk about level of commitment and readiness, we wanted to come up with some indicators that allow us to measure commitment and implementation capacity. Now, remember a bit of a background to this. Remember that there's always been a lot of trade protocols that have been signed in Africa at the various regional economic communities. If you talk of ECOWAS or SADC or COMESA, we've always had these regional economic communities, and there's always been an attempt at regional integration at multiple layers. I think the skepticism that a lot of Africans and stakeholders and observers have always had is that our governments are happy to sign regional trade protocols, but when it comes to implementation, there's always a challenge. And so the purpose of this report, and this is going to be an ongoing report, and this is the first one, which is the year 0 of AfCFTA implementation. Next year, when implementation starts, we're going to have the year 1 report. In the second year of implementation, we will have the year 2 report, and we will continue this as a benchmarking series that allows us to be able to track progress over time in terms of commitment and implementation. So given the backdrop to how implementation always lacks the enthusiasm that we see with the signing of regional agreements and protocols, the purpose of this report is to give us a sense of, some measurement, which on the basis of which we can do more advocacy, but also on the basis of which we can all provide advice and support to governments and institutions that are supposed to oversee the implementation of the regional trade agreement. Now, how do you measure country commitment and implementation readiness? These are the indicators that we came up with. Now, mind you that you could come up with a lot more indicators if you wanted to measure whether a country is committed, whether a country is ready for implementation. But for purposes of the year 0 report, we decided to focus on these first set of indicators. And the first indicator for commitment, we looked at whether the country has signed the CFTA agreement itself, whether the country has ratified the agreement, and we looked at whether the country has a national CFTA implementation strategy that was publicly available and accessible online. Because mind you, you don't just want a country to have an implementation strategy that is hidden from citizens and businesses. It's got to be available for the businesses and the citizens that are supposed to do the trading to see and to be able to take advantage of it. So these 3 sub-indicators were designed to give us a sense of, what level of commitment that a country has. Now, mind you, that some countries have signed the agreement, but they've not yet ratified. And we give a weight of 20% for this indicator. The second indicator was to measure the level of commitment to free movement of persons. Now, without free movement of people, trade cannot really happen. So the AFCFTA agreement itself doesn't include free movement of people. It's just an agreement for trading goods and services. And in order for that to be effective, people need to be able to move. So there is a complementary protocol on free movement of persons, which the African Union is also pursuing in parallel to the AFCFTA, because you need that for trade to happen. And so in terms of countries' commitment to free movement of persons, we looked at whether a country has signed the protocol on free movement. We looked at whether a country had ratified the protocol. And then we also looked at countries' visa openness, because what happens is that a country can sign and ratify the protocol on free movement, but then in practice, the country may not be committed to visa openness. And you could have some countries that are more visa open to fellow other African travelers moving within the continent, but they may not necessarily have signed the protocol on free movement of people. So we put all these together and weighted it aggregate at 20%. And then the third one, which measured implementation capacity readiness, we looked at trade facilitation readiness and capacity of a country. And that looked at customs efficiency and trade infrastructure. And then we looked at access to credit and trade finance for businesses in a particular country. So we put all of this together and weighted them as such. If you look at the main report, and I hope that you all get to see a copy of it. If you don't get a copy of it, if you Google it, the AFCFTA Year Zero report, it's online, you can have a copy to look at. You'll see how the sub-indicators are also weighted, in detail. But this is just a high-level summary of the indicators and the weights that we allocated to them. Now, here are the findings. When we put all of it together, as of May 2020, these were the top 10 most committed countries to the AFCFTA process. Rwanda came first, scored a very high marks, 83.93%, followed by Mali, Togo, Uganda, Ghana, Niger, and Kenya in that order. In the main report, when you look at it, we've ranked all the 55 member nations of the African Union. You can see the scores and the ranks for every country. So in terms of commitment, and if you remember the indicators, commitment means a combination of whether the country has signed the agreement, whether it has ratified the agreement, and whether the country has an implementation strategy that is at least in a draft form, even if it's not complete, but that drafting process is accessible to key stakeholders in the country, businesses and citizens to be able to have a look at. And then in addition to that, we looked at commitment to free movement of persons. So whether the country has signed, ratified the protocol on free movement, and then we looked at the country's visa openness, the extent to which it has visa openness to fellow Africans that are traveling within the continent. And this is how the country scored in terms of commitment, top 10. These were the bottom 10 least committed countries to the process as of May 2020. These were the bottom 10 in terms of the commitment rankings. Now, in terms of implementation readiness, these were the top 10 countries in terms of implementation readiness. So you have South Africa, Rwanda again. So Rwanda was number 1, in terms of commitment, and they scored number 2 in terms of implementation readiness. And then you had Botswana, Kenya again, and then Cote d'Ivoire, Mauritius, and Tanzania. And remember that implementation readiness was measured using trade facilitation capacity, and that you're looking at customs efficiency, as well as trade infrastructure, and access to trade finance for businesses to be able to do trading. In terms of the bottom 10 countries in terms of implementation readiness, this is the list. Burundi, Sierra Leone, Angola, Eritrea, Somalia, Eswatini, Cape Verde, and Seychelles. Again, if you look at the main report, you'll see how all the 55 countries were ranked in terms of implementation readiness for the CFTA. Now, if you combine implementation readiness and commitment, right? The previous rankings that I've just shown you are separately for level of commitment and level of implementation capacity. If you put the two together, if you put both commitment and implementation readiness together, this is how the countries ranked. So Rwanda came number 1, followed by Kenya, Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, Uganda, Ghana, Senegal, Mauritius, Djibouti. So this is the overall ranking. Countries that are both committed and also ready. I think we're getting some feedback from the background.
Yeah. Panelists, please mute your mics, except for Mr. Michael.
Okay, thank you. So statistically, in terms of rankings, these were the outcomes. Again, if you look at the main report, you see the overall rankings and how the various countries performed. I'm going to go over quickly a few of the insights that we noticed. Now, in terms of overall average commitment, if you took the entire continent as a whole, right, not individual countries, but if you put all the countries together and you looked at the continent's average commitment level to the CFTA process, we scored an average of a 44.48%. So that tells you that the commitment level of the continent is slightly below 50% as a whole, as of May 2020. In terms of implementation readiness, again, it was slightly just below 50%, 49.15, in terms of overall implementation capacity for the AFCFTA. Now, we noticed some interesting dynamics, and that had to do with the contrast between countries that are highly committed but poorly prepared. Well, to be more accurate, highly committed but relatively low implementation readiness. So that was one category. On the other hand, we had another set of countries that had relatively low commitments to the process, but in terms of implementation capacity, they scored very highly. And a few examples of these are listed here. And this is a very interesting dynamic because some of the most committed countries, they're doing everything right. They've signed, they've ratified, they're coming up with their implementation strategies. They're committed to visa openness. They're committed to free movement of persons.
Sorry, Michael, I have to stop you there. Unfortunately, we are running out of time. Thank you so much. But if we can maybe just ask Guy to join us, just so can he just reflect on his thoughts. We do have about 7 minutes left of this session. My apologies.
That's fine.
No worries. I was enjoying the presentation, Michael. So no worries there. So I'm just going to start. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, perfect.
Yes, we can hear you, Guy.
Okay, so my name is Guy Foodie. I was born in Gabon. My parents are from the DRC, and I've lived and worked in Kenya, Nigeria, and North Africa. I was formerly a managing director of Jumia, the e-commerce. I worked at Iroko Partners, which is a large streaming company, as a GM, and currently a consultant right now with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So I've had the distinct, privilege of, writing a report, COVID-19 post-pandemic and effect. Right, and for this, I think I'll just start by giving you guys a couple of quotes on from the interview, and then the report will be coming out in December from some of the leaders of e-commerce and digital businesses, and then we'll link that back up to how we can use the AFCTA to help us. So, as in North Africa, Sofiane Marzouki, the MD of Atlab, which is delivery food takeaway, he said COVID-19 has had a positive impact on the food tech space. Many countries in the region placed restrictions on dine-in. Restaurants had to move online to push delivery. This gave them a 20% increase in orders. Right now, if we look at an entrepreneur out in Nigeria, Tosin, who runs Shaka, he said that his business really got started when COVID-19 hit. They're an online trading platform, and then they saw huge user acquisition. As of recently, they were going for a raise of 250,000, and then now they closed that funding round at 1.3 million due to the boost of COVID. If we go again and we talk at, we hear Travel Start, which is an online e-commerce bookings, and we know how the the flights sector has taken a hit. We hear Philip Ackerson say flights were a core part of their business, and when COVID happened, they hardly sold any flights at all, right? And many people were looking for repatriated flights and moving around. But as the flight industry is still, recovering, Travel Start's income has increased. So they're not quite fully back up yet, but because they've been able to leverage the platform, they've seen greater growth than the rest of people in the business. When we see South Africa, Frans Yamstra of Uber says that they've been able to design products such as Uber Connect to really allow for logistics. They've been able to, integrate a new program called Uber Nam to expand across cities, and they've really targeted, usage. My former boss, Julia Anamau of Jumia, says that they've received significant, acquisitions all across Africa, including North Africa, including Morocco, to Tunisia, Kenya, South Africa. Right. So what I just want to say, because I know time is running out, I say that the AFCTA, in conjunction with, this global pandemic, what we can do is we can look at opportunities right now, and leverage the digital world through the AFCTA. I think, I've seen a lot of people, want to get involved and they want to build a better Africa. But it really starts at, okay, COVID-19 hit, we have this great protocol that allows us to do cross-border trading, that allows us to sell, that allows us to move logistics. And people are becoming less and less like, more and more, restrictions to travel and things such as those, right? So in my parting message, and I want to say that, you could use the AFCTA. You can figure out, okay, I'm in Kenya. We have great leather products. How do I get my product out to someone in Uganda? How do I get my product out to someone in Rwanda? Or how do I even get my product out to someone all the way in Nigeria, right? And this starts by also pushing your local legislators to have them implement the AFCTA measures and allow you to trade, because right now the world is going digital and we're going to need a protocol like the AFCTA to really champion economic growth and activity. That's about all I have to say. I'm happy to take questions. I don't want to run over time.
Thank you so much, Guy. And we apologize for mispronouncing your name this whole time. I heard you when you introduced yourself. Saying it's Guy.
We're Africans here.
Yeah. So. Thank you so much, both Michael and Guy. very insightful. It was a very insightful session. And since we're running out of time, I'm just going to pause one question for both of you to reflect on. I kind of selected one from the Q&A session, but later on you can just go in to the Q&A and answer directly to the questions that you were asked. But I pulled out one to just ask a general talk for both of you if African countries are actually ready with practical structures and resources. Are there any practical structures and resources in place for the AFCFTA to get to young people from all spheres to be part of the movement beyond the summit? So this is a general reflection for you. So I'll give the floor back to Michael so that he can also summarize his presentation, because we kind of abruptly took the floor from him. So 1 minute to summarize and 1 minute to reflect on this question, and I'll come back to Guy.
Thank you. And I wish that we had an indicator on level of youth participation in the process, and that is probably something that I believe we would look at going forward, because that's important. Citizen participation, more broadly civil society, but more specifically youth participation, youth entrepreneurs, and the potential employment impact on young people. I think we need to look at this, which is why the summit is extremely important, and would encourage you beyond the summit to see how this process can be taken forward. I think there are incredible opportunities. It's young people that will make the AFCFTA work, because trade is going digital, and it's young people that are driving the digital trends, right? E-commerce, fintech especially, are going to be extremely important. We can link these to all the regional value chains and the various supply chains that are needed. So this will give hope to young people in the continent, bigger markets, and we encourage that you guys, beyond the summit, let's see how we can continue the mobilization and keep track and monitor how young people are participating in the process.
So much, Michael. Guy?
Okay, I think I'm going to say some thought-provoking maybe things, right? I think what we need to do is, number one, we need to realize, what environment we're playing in, right? 85% of us live on less than $5 a day, right? And then yet we want to utilize this beautiful, internet economy. So that means a couple of things, right? We need to be very price conscious in our delivery, right? That means that, you keep, just for instance, right? Internet across Africa costs roughly $3 per gigabyte, right? I mean, if you run Instagram all day, you've just burnt up your your 1 gigabyte. It's 100 megabytes, right? So what I'm trying to say is okay, from a government perspective, the government needs to realize that they need to decrease things such as taxations and customs, right, to import equipment or to produce local phones, right? So we need to make the devices cheaper. We need to reduce the taxation. And from an entrepreneurial perspective, we need to be very, very strategic about what our target market wants and what they can afford, right? As an entrepreneur, when I was running Jumia across West Africa, well, I saw that the lower I reduced, the average price of the good, the more customers we onboarded and the more profits we made, right? So having specifically designed and targeted products that for our customers and for our markets, and using the digital platform to grow, right? That's what will get us to that next level. So yes, to answer your question, I do believe we have all the tools to leverage AFCFTA, leverage the digital world, but everything needs to come together, right? That's this one.
Thank you so much for this fire-up session. I'm sure that it ignited a lot of ideas and better insight of the AFCFTA to the young people. I'd like to thank both our speakers. I'm sure I've taken note of a lot of things, and I'm seeing by the comments that the young people are responding, they've also taken notes of everything that you've said. So thank you so much. This marks the end of this breakout session. So I'd like to return the floor to Grant, our MC. Thank you, Michael and Guy.
Yes.
Thank you, colleagues. As we get involved and we're so passionate about the sessions, I guess we can't help but go over time just a little bit. But thank you again to Bitania as well as Michael and Guy. Thank you for the correction there with your name. Now, without any sort of break, I will ask us if we can please move on to our third and final panel for the day. And it's really reflecting on the keynote address that we heard from Dorothy Tembu earlier on around finance. So the title of this particular panel is Innovative Funding, Measures for Your Business During the Pandemic and Beyond. And to basically moderate that panel, I'd like to introduce Chuks Okerekwe from Nigeria. He is our current YALDA Nigeria president. So Chuks, over to you. We look forward to hearing about what are some of these innovative funding strategies. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Grant. It's indeed a pleasure to moderate this panel session. Just like Grant rightly said, the panel session is actually titled Innovative Funding Measures for Your Business During the Pandemic and Beyond. I understand that we have quite a lot of panelists already on board. Kindly change your name, the name displaying on your screen. We currently have a wrong name. Kindly help us to change that to your exact name so we can know when you join us. Thank you. So basically, we understand that the impact of the pandemic on the African economy has been dire, whereby it is projected that Africa may lose half of its GDP, cutting growth by 3 to 8%, and then of course it could also lead to extreme poverty on the continent. The ECA estimates that COVID-19 could lead to Africa's export revenues from fuels falling at around $101 billion in 2020. Remittances and tourism have also been affected, resulting in a decline in FDI inflows. We've had issues with capital flights, domestic financial market tightening, slowdown in investment, and of course, which would ultimately lead to job losses. In the midst of the pandemic, this panel of esteemed speakers will examine various alternative funding measures for small businesses in Africa in a bid to spur economic recovery through SMEs. It is a great honor and privilege to invite various panelists for today's session. We'll be having Claire Baker. Claire Baker is the head of the foundation, Africa Digital Media Foundation. We'll also be having Lanre Oloniyi, who happens to be the co-founder of Orbit Capital. We'll also be having Letitia Brown, the co-director of Intelligent Capital, as well as Stephen Karingi, who is Director of Regional Integration, Infrastructure and Trade Division at UNECA. And lastly, we'll be having Lala Sanadri Salami, the head of financial institutions at Jari Wafa Bank. To start, I would like to call Mr. Lanre to take the opening question. The opening question basically is this. Now, one major challenge in building and sustaining a business in Africa is access to finance, access to funding. Now, due to COVID-19, many funding opportunities that were either available to growing businesses in Africa were closed due to global uncertainty and the need for emergency supplies to combat the virus. This obviously has led to the shrinking of available resources for business sustainability, hence the need to explore other funding options. Unlike countries which can be directly funded by DFIs, these funding opportunities are not readily available to small businesses who rely on short-term loans from local banks to survive and fund their operations. What alternative funding options are available to small businesses given the impact of COVID-19? Mr. Lang, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Chuks, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to join the panel. Your question is quite pertinent, and I think we've all seen across the continent the challenges that have been faced by SMEs in accessing finance, even in regular times. even in regular times. I think, yeah, there's a bit of background noise, just if everyone put on mute. Thank you, Chris. Right, so there's been the challenges for SMEs in Africa to access funding in regular times is always been a recurring theme within the African investment ecosystem, and you know, the COVID crisis has actually compounded that. Having said that, one of the things that we've observed, not just through our platform in terms of capital movements, but also in terms of activities and participation by the DFIs, the banks, and the non-bank, the non-financial institutions, it's been the case of everyone rethinking on how you can access funding. Now, I know SMEs are a catch-all for sort of various sizes of businesses, but for the purpose of, you know, my sort of my talk and